Good evening. And magic happens. Good evening. Welcome to this public hearing of the Charter Revision Commission. My name is Sharon Greenberger. I'm honored to serve as vice chair of this commission. I want to start by asking if there's anyone here who currently needs ESL assistance or ASL. I have a lot of other things on my mind. ASL assistance, our staff is on their way, but I want to make sure we are accommodating anybody who has immediate needs. Okay, well, we will see them shortly. Thank you for coming out. Our commission's mission is to look at ways to make city government more transparent and responsive, with a particular focus on the city's housing crisis. It is this commission's responsibility to review the entire charter and suggest changes for the voters' consideration. Only if the voters agree to those changes at an election will any changes to the charter go into effect. I know that I speak for my fellow commissioners when I say that we are committed to hearing from a broad spectrum of New Yorkers and to pursuing the best ideas we can find. This hearing is just one of many public hearings across every borough to hear ideas from experts, community leaders, elected officials, and indeed any member of the public who wishes to testify. Importantly, this is an independent commission. In making our recommendations to the city's voters, we are bound only by our judgment and our values. We will pursue ideas regardless of who proposed them and regardless of who supports them. Joining me in this task are 12 other commissioners: Chair Richard Bury, who's joining us virtually, Secretary Lila Bozorg, Grace Bonilla, Shams DeBaron, Anita Laremont, Dr. Lizette Nieves, Anthony Richardson, Julie Samuels, Diane Savino, Carl Weisbrod, Valerie White, and Catherine Wild. Although, as I said, we'll be considering the entire charter, the commission is looking in particular at our charter's approach to housing and planning. From my perspective, there is no urgent challenge for this body to take up given the city's housing crisis. We are in the midst of a profound affordability crisis for millions of low-income New Yorkers. Housing costs are the central struggle of their lives. For millions more, especially low-income New Yorkers, our housing crisis severely limits where New Yorkers can live, what schools they can attend, how they get to work, and whether their families can stay together. Our commission is also taking a close look at the problem of chronically low voter turnout in city elections. Although our city has a vibrant civic life, we suffer from consistently low turnout in local elections. We're also particularly interested in how to ensure that nonprofit partners who provide vital services for New Yorkers are paid on time for their work. The commission staff recently released a lengthy preliminary report summarizing what our commission has heard at public hearings so far and identifying areas to explore going forward. That report is available at nyc.gov/charter. As the report reflects, your thoughtful testimony has driven and will continue to drive this process as it unfolds. Testimony of any kind on any topic is welcome at today's hearing. So let me say a few words about how this hearing will be run. We'll generally hear from those who are attending this meeting in person before turning to virtual testimony. However, as part of our work to explore the details of alternative election models, we've invited experts from around the country to join us, and we'll hear from them as their schedules permit. Members of the public are asked to testify for no longer than 3 minutes. We have a clock. We stick to it. We will call for testimony from 3 people, actually 2 people at a time, followed by any questions from the commission. I'll ask commissioners to hold their questions until the full panel has finished. If you wish to testify virtually, there is a form online. You can find it on the meeting page for this hearing. If you go to nyc.gov/charter, click on the meetings tab and select the Bronx hearing. We'll also drop a link to the form in the chat. We will do our best to hear from everyone who wishes to speak today. This meeting is scheduled to run until 8 p.m., thus the importance of the 3-minute time frame. In the event we don't hear from you this evening, there are many more opportunities to submit testimony. This is just one of many public hearings that have been announced. Again, you can visit nyc.gov/charter to find more information about all of our public hearings. And let me say, we receive and we read all of the testimony that comes through. You can also submit written testimony to the commission by emailing chartertestimony@citycharter.nyc.gov. And if you cannot attend a hearing in real time, each of the commission hearings will be public, live streamed, and recorded for archival purposes. So I think first I would like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from our May 28th public hearing. May I have a motion? Carl, and may I have a second? Thank you. Is any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? The minutes are adopted. Thank you so much. And with that, let's get to our testimony. I think we are going to start with an online participant, Councilmember Frank Morano. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to call you up.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I appreciate it. I appreciate once again the opportunity to testify. I want to follow up on a critical issue that could fundamentally reshape democracy in New York City, which is the structure of our elections. And I know you and the other members of the commission are taking the mandate to improve voter turnout and to otherwise improve New York City civic life and electoral life very seriously. And I'm grateful for that. Specifically, though, I urge this commission to reject the flawed models of top 2 and top 4 elections and instead adopt a simple, effective, and proven alternative. Single round nonpartisan elections with ranked choice voting, as we already use for special elections in New York City, like the one that I was elected in April. So let me be clear. Top 2, from my perspective and from the voters' perspective, is a disaster. There's a reason no other state has followed California's lead on this. It has narrowed the political playing field, disadvantaged independent and third-party candidates, and actually entrenched the dominance of the 2 major parties. In practice, top 2 often results in 2 candidates from the same party making the general election ballot, leaving entire ideological communities with no real choice. That's not reform, in my view, it's regression. Top 4, while a lot better, is still deeply flawed. It creates a confusing 2-step process, introduces unnecessary complexity for voters, and erects even more procedural barriers for candidates who aren't backed by political machines or flush with cash. There's no compelling evidence that Alaska's model, which is the most similar to top 4, has improved voter turnout or trust in government. In fact, it's created what I would argue is a Rube Goldberg machine of political mechanics, one that New Yorkers neither asked for nor deserve. We already have the model we need. Special elections in New York City are nonpartisan and use ranked choice voting. Any voter can participate, any candidate can participate. Why complicate what's working? Here's why the single round nonpartisan RCV model makes sense. It's simple. 1 election, 1 ballot. Voters rank candidates in order of preference, no primary, no runoff, no double the expense, double the confusion, or double the turnout drop-off. It's fair. Candidates of every political stripe, Democrat, Republican, third party, or independent, compete on a level playing field. Voters don't have to worry about the wasted vote syndrome of the person splitting the vote and allowing someone they really don't like to get in. It's familiar. New Yorkers already use RCV in special elections. They understand how it works. They're growing to understand it more as it's been used more and more, and it's been implemented without chaos or without too much controversy. It strengthens democracy. It incentivizes candidates to appeal to a broad swath of voters, not just their partisan base, leading to more civil, inclusive, and representative campaigns. Lastly, some of the proposals under consideration seem to be solutions in search of a problem. Let's not reinvent the wheel with experimental systems that have failed elsewhere. Let's double down on what's already working. Nonpartisan, single round, ranked choice elections. Anything else, in my view, is a step backward. And I think the people of the city of New York deserve better than that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will ask my fellow commissioners if there are any questions of the council member.
Just one question.
Yes.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Commissioner.
What you're suggesting is just the November election, no June primary, simply a November election, nonpartisan ranked choice.
That's correct. And I think, for instance, if you were to have the top two system in place now, the top two candidates in the November election would almost certainly be Democrats. And I think the 25 to 30% of New Yorkers that might be inclined to vote for Curtis Lewa or another Republican, not only would they not show up in the mayor's race, but I think it would have a deleterious effect on turnout in every competitive, what's now a competitive city council seat. And I think it could actually worsen the problem the commission is trying to solve with respect to voter turnout. Now, I don't think that's as bad of a situation with top four. That's why out of those two proposals, I think top four is far preferable. But I think you still have a situation where if you're a libertarian or a green or someone that likes to vote for a third party or independent candidates, those candidates simply wouldn't get access to the ballot. And I don't understand how that's served. I mean, I know they've tried this in Alaska, but there's 150 democracies in the world. There's a reason not one of them has done top four or top five anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you for taking the time.
Appreciate you.
And we will move to in-person testimony. First up will be Barika Williams and Howard Slatkin. You could join us at the front. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Stenographers. Barika's asking me to
You're very diplomatic.
spend a lot of time. Good evening, Vice Chair Greenberger, Chair Bury, and Commissioners. Howard Slatkin, I'm Executive Director of Citizens Housing and Planning Council. Happy to be back to talk about the recommendations you are currently considering for land use reforms. Certainly, thank you. As the Commission sorts through recommendations that address identified flaws in the land use process, I urge you to be mindful that the problem is not just that some neighborhoods refuse to allow housing at all, but also that the system encourages inadequate housing everywhere. We've discussed the major flaw that exists, that local members are able to shut down housing applications in their own districts for all intents and purposes, but there is also, for instance, another common practice that I've called hungry hippos zoning. This is when individual council members use the Euler process to secure affordable housing commitments that can only be met by publicly subsidizing housing. It's an obvious political victory for a member to be able to say they're getting more affordable housing for their district, and it also sounds like a substantive victory for affordability, but this is often illusory because this practice just shifts the same pool of finite housing subsidies that exist from one neighborhood to another. Doesn't increase the amount of affordable housing that gets built in the city, and rezoning only for subsidized housing doesn't actually increase the effective zoned capacity of the city, which is still limited by the amount of subsidy available. As long as decisions are viewed through local blinders, we will always have shortcomings in our land use review process and its ability to meet our housing needs. I also want to caution the Commission about the idea of combining community board and borough president review into the same 60 days, which sounds like a 30-day savings, but it may in fact diminish rather than enhance the borough president's bully pulpit during the process. Forcing the VP to take an early position, issuing potentially a concurrent conflicting recommendation would often be a greater liability to a borough president than, for instance, to the community board. In contrast, enhancing the borough president's role closer to the end of the process, for instance, as CHPC has proposed, allowing a borough president to trigger an appeal vote following a city council vote, would do more to elevate their broader geographical perspective. Also, making the City Planning Commission public hearing occur 30 days earlier would make it virtually impossible to submit a modified or A application that addresses issues that are beyond the scope of the original application. This is something that is already difficult in the current process, but would become virtually impossible. So a shortened process like this may be appropriate for minor or straightforward applications rather than for other more complex applications. To the extent that reforms, I'm out of time. I wanted to just briefly suggest that when reforms are applied to geographies where housing production is deemed inadequate, that the determination should be essentially automated and based on objective data rather than on targets set by city, mayoral agencies or the city council. I can elaborate on that or any of the other points as the commission wishes.
Thank you so much. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm shorter. Good evening, everybody. My name, nope, yep, still, okay. I was like, I'm still shorter. Good evening, everybody. My name is Barika Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD, and pleasure to be here, Vice Chair, and here in the Bronx specifically. ANHD is a membership organization with more than 80 plus neighborhood-based nonprofits across the city, including many of the nonprofit affordable housing developers and managers that you were mentioning in your opening. And we also convened the Thriving Communities Coalition, a citywide movement of grassroots advocacy and policy and technical assistance groups working across the city on equitable land use planning and really fighting our current ad hoc approach to planning and land use in the city. So coming back to you all after previously testifying in February and really wanting to focus, Howard queued it up perfectly, on that last piece of understanding where we are given the current existing fair housing plans and how in light of the report, the commission could potentially be maybe not prepared to advance comprehensive planning overall, which is what we've been pushing for, but we still believe that this is a key opportunity to advance one of the key components and outcomes of fair housing by better aligning land use and budget pieces. So in this, a crucial goal would be to sort of codify and create some consideration around how certain discretionary housing proposals can move on a different and faster timeline than others. So the key thing to stress here is we understand that the desire is to expedite and reduce bottlenecks for affordable housing development, but has to be done in a way that follows a plan that ensures that we're maintaining equitable planning and outcomes across the city, and that those plans are rooted in equity. So our proposal and what we're bringing back to you all is requiring, first and foremost, the city council to vote on the targets. The goal here is to codify the targets by city council. And while you can never take the politics out of the process, in theory, to move the politics to a single moment in time up front. Think of it in my mind vis-a-vis the like big ugly up in Albany, like everybody's got to have vegetables and some dessert at the same time. We make that decision together, as opposed to right now, we're doing that one by one at the end of each ULURP process, right? Part two would be to empower community boards to create some of these plans themselves, hopefully in good faith, to say, like, we have an idea of how we want to advance some of the things that we see as issues. So for example, communities like, we really need to prioritize senior housing, and all we're seeing is 1-bedroom units, or all we're seeing is units that don't feel like they're ADA as accessible, right? And then to expedite housing that meets the targets. So what we propose here is that 100% affordable housing projects go through in an expedited timeline and process, also creating some additional predictability for the cost of those projects, and that mixed income affordable housing projects that meet certain criteria and in certain neighborhoods could also be accelerated, sort of in an understanding that certain neighborhoods won't be meeting their 5-year targets. And I know my time is up, so I will stop there.
Thank you so much. I have a quick question for each of you. First, Brika, on yours, do you have specific ways to enforce meeting those targets, in addition to expediting potentially plans that help meet those targets? Any other specific mechanisms?
Yes. So we went more with the incentive side than the penalty side, right? Also thinking about some of the things and pushback and feedback we've seen in statewide housing proposals and other things. It feels like that has been better received. So it would be that 100% affordable moves through. If you haven't met your 5-year targets, you are now open to a much wider swath moving through on an accelerated timeline. So now your mixed income affordable projects can move in the same accelerated timeline as your 100% affordable. So now we've kind of like doubled the pool of what can move more quickly, with the understanding, and this is where one of the feedbacks we also heard from our membership was the desire and need, and Howard talked about this as well, to not eliminate community voice in this process. So to appreciate that some community boards might be like, everything that's getting developed is a studio, and we're families that need 3 and 4 buildings. What we want to do is set our plan to say, we want affordable that is 4 family-sized units, and to give that the acceleration, but maybe not say that everything has to be accelerated.
Thank you. And Howard, you mentioned an appeals process. I can't remember if your exact words were automated or objective criteria. Do you want to elaborate on what those are?
Sure. And I think and this is I think a same set of issues that Barrico is talking about in a somewhat different take on it, which is that this is the idea that for whichever provisions are triggered by some measure of inadequate housing production, and we've suggested some in our proposal at CHPC, others have suggested other mechanisms triggered by that. But the challenge with any mechanism that any mechanism in which the measure determines who participates in the Euler process, the people who are participants in the Euler process should not be participants in setting that target, because it creates an incentive to gain targets to either include or exclude people from the Euler process in a way that's not related to what the actual housing target underlying that should be. A much simpler, cleaner, less controversial, subjective, and manipulable version of that would be to just take the lowest 25%. For instance, if the issue that I'm suggesting, that the lack of production of new affordable housing in a district over a period of time, is the threshold question. If you take the lowest 25% of community districts in that category, then that is going to capture the districts that are producing the least affordable housing overall, and it doesn't involve subjective determinations about who should or who shouldn't have a vote in which part of the process.
Understood. Thank you. Yes, Valerie, please.
Ulrika,
Get friendly with the mic.
I'm not short, so I have to do the other way. Just in looking at the 3 steps that you laid out, the city council voting on targets and the community boards creating plans themselves, then the expediting, I'm assuming you are looking at it in order. What potentially do you think there's a potential that once the city council votes on a target, the community boards will be engaged in the plan, but they're not agreeing with the number that's there? How do you think that will work? And I don't know if the community boards still feel like you're saying you have to do a particular type of housing.
No, and yes, absolutely. And I think it is almost assured that there will be community boards that do not agree with the targets that are set for them, right? And in that regard, I completely agree with what Howard said of the part of this is to say setting those targets is about not just, we're trying to, in the city council vote and in the community board vote, what we're trying to balance is that what needs to be the guiding star is the citywide goals. And that there is a role for then communities to say, I want to influence or give input into how my community board then meets its obligation to be a part of that guiding star, right? Not that they can opt out of that guiding star. Not that they can say, well, I don't like what happens to the guiding star and I don't agree with it, and we're not, that then puts them into the, okay, you didn't want to participate, now everything is moving through, all of these 100% and mixed income units are moving through on a much faster threshold. The one place I would say we probably have a little bit difference in terms of how threshold is how I was talking about that bottom 25%. I think we are a little bit more concerned about what that data could look like over time, especially considering that there are a number of community districts in New York City who have done vastly higher than their share over the past 20 years. And so at some point in the future, it might be quite appropriate for them to fall to that bottom 25% and that not actually be a penalty, that other people should be doing more in order for us to over time sort of even out. right? And so that's why we think about it more as targets and less so as like percentage thresholds, so that in theory, we as a city could say, okay, Kingsbridge, okay, Flatbush, you've done your percentage times 10 over in the past few years. And so we will allow you to have a lower set of targets for this next 5-year period intentionally, and that not be something that they get penalized for.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you both for your testimony. Brika, on the council voting process, have you guys thought through kind of how that plays out if the council can't get a majority of folks to approve? I'm trying to imagine a situation, especially because if in a world where it's up, down, I read the testimony, and it is really just about targets. There's not much more to negotiate on in the way that, like a big budget might be negotiated. What would be the kind of, is it about having a clock? So they have to either do up, down by a certain time, or how would, if we can't get a majority to approve it, would the process fall apart? Walk through a little bit how it would play out if you can't get council to.
I hope Chris is over my shoulder, not gonna kick me from afar, and that I'm. doing this
I'd
right.
love to hear, I'm sure you guys have thought about it, so I'm very curious, like.
So I think
yeah,
there's like
yeah,
sort of two
yeah,
approaches. One
yeah.
gets a little muddlier.
Yeah.
And then the other one maybe is a little bit cleaner, but maybe a little more just uncomfortable for council members. So one is if council members as a body can't come to a consensus, it now goes into the administration, right?
Okay.
It goes into, so.
What was proposed,
So,
basically, it
right.
defaults to
It
the plan.
defaults
Okay,
to
okay.
the plan, right?
Okay,
It's like
that makes
either
sense.
You all as council members can,
Come up with some other
Come-
mix that you're
right.
comfortable with.
or. Sorry, but either you all as council members can come up with something, or it will default back to what the administration came up with. In our mind, that sort of balances out checks and balances of powers, figure it out, come to some consensus in a room. We all know it's never that clean or neat, but the way to exercise a counterbalance to the mayor's administration is to formulate your own set of numbers and targets that you pass. The other version would be to tie the targets in with the budget process for the city. So in a sense, sort of folding it into a big ugly type vote, tying it into money. And so you don't get your money if you don't have this, right? So tying your carrot and stick. I'm not sure which one is which.
That's helpful. I had a follow-up. Sorry. Is that okay? Sorry. I was just hoping, Howard, the last thing you were trying to explain that you didn't quite have time for, I just wanted, if you have a moment to elaborate on that. No, sorry. Oh, you did?
Yeah, I think that was.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, I will read the answer. Sorry, I didn't get that.
Any other questions? Thank you both so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. And we will now turn to Louisa Chafe. Oh, no, Carl.
Both are going to be submitting written testimony.
Yes, I think we already.
Rick
have
already did.
Submitted written testimony and it.
Yes.
Yes, and then Howard has some here, so we can get those. And I would be remiss if I also didn't say it is not the part of our testimony, but we strongly support changes to nonprofit contracts and payments, considering that we have probably an average of 2 million in 3 years worth of back pay across each one of our 80+ members.
Thank you. And that is a good segue to our next speaker. Louisa Chafee is going to be joining us online. Louisa?
Hi, thank you.
greetings.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So good evening. I'm Louisa Chafee. I'm the director of the New York City Independent Budget Office. I'm pleased to again testify to you on these important issues, drawing from both IBO's analysis and experience and my own history in City Hall and Albany. First, I support the idea to elevate the Mayor's Office of Contract Services to becoming a charter position. Authority, management, and accountability are all critical to procurement reform. Today, the Charter defines the roles of no fewer than 25 separate mayoral offices, but is silent on MOCs. Thus, it is too easy for charter-empowered agency heads to discount MOCs' efforts based on this apparent inequality in authority. The Mayor's Office of Operations is, in both in function and spirit, the most analogous to MOCs. IBO suggests that the charter language defining operations should be the model for defining MOCs. I also laud this commission's focus on the city's lateness in paying the nonprofit vendors that serve vulnerable New Yorkers. There are two distinct compliance issues in this area. The first is late registration. City agencies are chronically late in registering human service contracts, whether new awards or continuations. The city cannot legally pay for services or provide in advance during the period where there is no registered contract. It's rare for there to be a service that is genuinely and completely new. And so the solution is to require city agencies to register contract continuations before an existing contract expires. My written testimony provides way more information. The second problem is late payment on invoices. When a city agency is slow to pay a private sector vendor, say for construction, they may just stop working and find other customers. They may also raise their bid prices the next time around when engaging with the city. Nonprofit providers have no such options. Pricing is basically predetermined by the city and they have no alternate customers. Plus, nonprofits are mission-driven and committed to serving New Yorkers, so most struggle on. Many times invoices are not paid as city agencies dispute minor items. My written testimony provides details on how the charter can fix this issue. The Procurement Policy Board sets the policy and standards for city procurement. It can benefit from some common sense reforms. 1, it should be mandated to meet at least 4 times a year. 2, its membership should be doubled in size and should be comprised of fewer government employees. The charter language that defines the IBO's advisory committee provides a useful model. 3, it should have a director and even a small staff. And 4, and that's it. Okay. But before closing, I'd like to highlight, I'm so excited about the PPP. I'd like to highlight 2 other ideas. 1, the charter should require emergency contracts to be reapproved by the controller and the mayor every 2 years. Recent lessons from COVID and asylum seekers demonstrate that without time limits, poor fiscal and management choices are easily made. And finally, the charter language around units of appropriation should be strengthened. Units of appropriation are supposed to tell the public what is being spent for each, quote, particular program, purpose, activity, or institution, unquote. In practice, many agencies account for unrelated programs with separate funding streams within a single UA. For example, DYCD combines after-school and immigrant services in one UA, and those are not the same program. The NYPD puts nearly a quarter of its budget into a single UA, and that covers all police precincts, borough-wide offices, and various specialty units. This tells us nothing useful about the PD's budget. With looming federal budget cuts, understanding where federal monies actually support city programs will be critical to public accountability. The current UA practice flies in the face of the charter's goals. So I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I welcome the opportunity to work with you and your staff around these and other issues. And I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know you're going to submit your testimony.
Yes, I
If you
am.
could very briefly, you mentioned that you have several ideas around late payments. If you could identify the one that you feel most strongly about,
Yes,
that you've included.
Yes, the city's automatic payment systems within FMS, the financial management system, and Passport should be programmed in such a way to automatically pay a certain percentage, say 80% of the invoice automatically. This allows the smaller areas that are debated to continue, and it doesn't add risk because remember, there's an audit after the process.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Louise. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. I think we have Grace Rao and Ben Weinberg in person. If you could both join us in the front.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Grace Rao. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Union, and I'm joined by Ben Weinberg, our Policy Director. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening. I'm here to express our strong support for the proposal to move New York City's municipal elections to even-numbered years. The Commission's thoughtful and thorough report outlines the clear benefits from this reform. especially its potential to dramatically increase voter participation. It also raises important considerations that I'd like to briefly address. First, why should we do this now in the city charter? We need to be prepared. For years, New York State has moved to consolidate elections to combat low turnout in off-cycle contests. In just the past few years, we've seen school board elections in Buffalo, village elections in Onondaga County, and even primary runoffs in New York City get shifted or consolidated to address low voter turnout. A 2023 state law moved most county and town elections to even number years to boost voter engagement. And in 2024, the New York State Senate passed a constitutional amendment that would have allowed New York City to do the same. And we know that more reforms are on the horizon. New York City should not wait to be told when to act. If a constitutional amendment enabling New York City to control its election calendar passes in 2027, we would still need a charter revision commission and another referendum in 2028 to enact that change in New York City. Just as many candidates are campaigning for 2029. That is frankly too late. Reform tied up in election year politics would invariably be more challenging. Acting now, this year in 2025, gives us a rare chance to do this cleanly, credibly, and proactively. A statewide constitutional amendment mandating even year elections for all cities could also resolve this, but let's be honest, it is not going to happen without strong public momentum. A popular New York City referendum would show Albany that voters do want change. Additionally, public opinion polling suggests that a ballot question on even years would be widely supported by voters. Surveys have found that nearly 3-to-1 support for this reform in New York City exists across age, race, education, party lines, consistent with statewide and national polling. And across the country, these ballot measures have had a remarkable success rate. In 35 of 36 cities where voters weighed in directly, they approved referenda to consolidate election calendars, on average with 72% support. Here in New York City, we know that support for this reform not only comes from voters. Our own research at Citizens Union found that the very candidates it would affect are strongly in favor of changing our election calendar. And we put out some new data on that earlier today. Finally, this isn't a radical idea supported by one political faction. It's a common sense, smart, widely supported reform that would strengthen our democracy and bring more New Yorkers into the process. Thank you for considering it.
Thank you so much. Ben. Oh, you're good. You're together. Okay. Ready to answer any questions?
Hello, Grace and Ben. Good to see you guys again. So generally, I understand the concept, and I think I was in Albany when we passed the first attempt at even year elections. But I have a couple of questions. If we were to do this, because I agree with you, if we're going to do it, we should put it on this year in the event that the legislature in Albany actually gets its act together and passes it in 2 consecutive sessions and the voters adopt it. So we don't have to come back and do this again. But what would be the time frame for the implementation? Because right now we're on odd and even years. So who gets bumped? I mean, have you guys thought that through?
Yeah, I can answer that. There are various ways of doing that transition. We looked at cities and states around the country. There isn't actually one specific trend. Some cities shorten terms, some cities extend their terms. The way the state has done it in the 2023 law, and that's also the provision that is being considered now for changing the state constitution, would essentially, once passed, the moment the bill is enacted, all elected officials get to finish their term, which is a key element of this. So you don't want to cut any elected official's term in the middle. Then you hold another odd year election after that legislation is enacted, and the people who run in that odd year elections run for a truncated term. So you either shorten the term you usually shorten the term by 1 year. It depends on the length of the term. In New York City, you'll shorten it by 1 year. So if the process plays out the way we describe it, in 2029, candidates will run for a 3-year term that will finish in 2032. So we'll have our first, let's say, mayoral even year election in 2032. for 4 years.
Okay, would we or the state have to change those terms statutorily because terms of office are statute?
Right.
So, we pass the odd even year approval, right? So that
Yeah.
in the event it happens, we're able to move forward
Yeah.
quickly. Then we pick the year it would start, the offices that would be affected, and then the state legislature and or the city we would have to change our local election laws to be able to shorten the time, the term that I'm currently sitting.
Yeah.
So if I had a 4-year term, now I only serve a 3-year term, and now I go on that. So it requires some other legislation.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
it depends how you draft it.
Mhm. You're assuming that, I'm sorry, not to interrupt you. You mean if the constitutional amendment was drafted, it could address those issues?
Yeah, the way there are a couple of bills up in Albany consider. The way they're drafted is that a constitutional amendment would just change the language in the constitution that says even or odd.
Mhm.
And then an implementing state law, a companion bill,
Right.
would lay out the mechanism for transition that is already in existence.
And I think finally, the last question, because I know there are some people who are concerned, mostly in local governments, counties, et cetera, that shifting it from the everything to an even year election where voter turnout is driven largely by the top of the ticket. That's where most of the money is spent on the presidentials and or gubernatorial races, that the local issues get lost, that nobody pays attention to who your local alderman is or your council person or your state assembly person. And I think I shared at one of the previous hearings, having been at the bottom of the ballot in a presidential year myself over the years, like we would develop a campaign strategy to tell people to vote from the bottom up, because there is a huge amount of drop off from the top of the ticket. How do we prevent that? Or is there evidence in other states where they have adopted this even year election where the whole, I guess the hope is that you'll drive voter turnout? Are we seeing a drop off from the top of the ticket, particularly at the local level? Or has it improved voter turnout and then improved voter, I guess, participation all the way down the ballot? And if you don't know that answer, that's fine, but I really would be interested to see how that's affected those candidates.
Yeah. So we do know the answer for that, because that's one of the first things that we review this topic, because that is concerning. So the truth is, and we see it all around the country, longer ballots get higher ballot drop off. That's like undisputable. However, because we face such low turnout in odd year election now, the benefits you get by moving to even years is much larger than the increase in drop off by moving to even years. So in that sense, even the races for state senate or state assembly, or like the down ballot races today in even years, receive much higher turnout than their parallel races in the odd year election. So we have some numbers actually in the testimony from other cities. Baltimore, we saw an increase of about 18,000 voters in 18,000 drop off, increase in drop off, but an increase of about 200,000 voters overall for that same race. That is a down ballot race. And even today, if you look at the down ballot races in an even year. So last year we had several proposals on the ballot. Right. Prop number 1 in a presidential year, we looked at the turnout for that proposal, not for the president. That was 51%. For president, it was about 59%. So that's 8% drop off. It's not a small amount of drop off, but 51% for the ballot proposal number 1 on the back of the ballot is still more than 2 times the number of people who voted for the mayor of the largest city in the country in an odd number of years. So even today, those down ballot races receive much more voter attention than the kind of high profile races in the odd year.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And yes, Carl.
I just want to understand your proposal. I understand the desirability of even year elections, but specifically on your proposal, are you suggesting that we change the charter generically, simply to say we support even year elections, leaving it up to the state to decide through the constitutional process whether it's presidential years or gubernatorial years or exactly what the process is? And doesn't that either way, whether we're more specific or less specific, really open it up to the likelihood of a further or new charter commission having to revise whatever we do because the state constitutional process has become specific and we have to abide by it.
So I think there are two ways of looking at it. Because the way that the state proposals have, so the state proposals have so far have developed the mechanism for transition in such a way where they lay out a process where, as I mentioned earlier, you cut 1 year off the next term after the enactment of the bill. So the year, whether it moves to a gubernatorial or presidential year, kind of just depends on the year you are currently holding your odd year election. So for example, if that passes, New York City, Albany, Rochester, and other cities move to a presidential election. But
I think your mic went out.
Hear me? Oh,
Yeah, now you're
sorry.
back.
So I was saying, for example, New York City, Buffalo, Albany would move to a presidential election under that mechanism. Yonkers, who is Yonkers, it keeps going in and out. Yonkers, who is that currently hold their election in 2023, would move to a gubernatorial election. All that is to say that yes, we think the safest bet is to say, let's say in this charter to say, and if the state allows New York City to change its election, elections shall be held in even numbered years instead of the current language, which says every 4 years since.
So just a simple answer to my question is, you're recommending simply a generic change to even years and leaving exactly what happens after that.
The how.
State constitutional process.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and there could be, yeah, I would just say we could develop it further. I think there are ways to develop the mechanism for transition in the charter process. You could include the same language, or for example, the same mechanism that the state has in the city charter.
Well, we don't know what the state will do until the state does it.
Right. But you can develop that if the constitution changes to require New York City to hold its election on even years, whatever you put on the charter is moved, in any case. But if it does allow the city some leeway in developing its own election calendar, then that will go into effect, the transition mechanism that you develop. Does that make sense?
It's a multi-step process that requires state involvement as well.
Yes.
Yes. Any other questions? Thank you both very, very much. We're going to return to Zoom and we're going to ask two speakers to come forward, and then as a panel, we'll ask questions. So I would like Eric Budd and Greg Dennis to join us. We'll start with Eric and then turn to Greg, and then if Eric would stick around in case we have questions for both of you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Budd. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I'm a co-founder of two nonprofit organizations here, People for Voter Turnout and Bedrooms Are for People. And the work in these organizations that I've done is really at the intersection of municipal voter representation and housing. So I'm here to talk about election timing as well. So our organizations have helped lead on research and campaigning to move Boulder's municipal elections to November of even years, like you all are proposing here, aligned with the state and federal elections. That measure passed in Boulder in 2022 and will be fully implemented in 2026. I believe that every city should move their elections to align with the state and federal elections because that's when the highest number of people are voting, particularly in the presidential years. Our democratic processes and representation really work best when everyone is able to vote and participate in these elections equally. And moving the election timing is the single most effective way to increase voter turnout. The other most important aspect in addressing the election timing is not just how many people are represented in these elections, but who is represented. Off-cycle municipal elections like New York City's greatly reduce turnout among people of color, young people, students, renters, and other marginalized demographics. Ultimately, when these voices aren't heard in our elections, their input is also lessened when it comes to implementing policy. It's important to understand that the off-cycle election timing leads to a systemic reduction in voter participation that is not equitable across the city. One of the policies that tends to be most negatively affected is housing, which I know you all are concerned with as a body. All of our data and research has shown that off-cycle elections most prominently overrepresent homeowners, particularly those in single-family homes who are older, wealthier, and housing secure. And this has a significant effect on the seriousness that cities in their efforts to address the housing crisis. The benefit of even year elections are significant for a lot of reasons. I do want to address a common concern that's already been raised in this meeting that ballots will be longer and elections more crowded. The two main things to consider here are that longer ballots typically are a benefit to turnout as there are more issues that people want to weigh in on and draw them to actually cast a ballot. While down ballot drop off in voting is always a concern, the increase in the total number of people turning in ballots and voting in on-cycle elections by far outweighs the marginal increases in down ballot drop off from people not finishing their entire ballot. So I want to thank you for your consideration of this issue for the New York Charter Committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Terrific. So just stick around for a minute. I'm going to ask Greg Dennis to join us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to the Commission for inviting me to speak. My name is Greg Dennis. I'm Policy Director for Voter Choice Massachusetts, a statewide organization that promotes ranked choice voting in Massachusetts. 2 years ago, we initiated the effort to bring ranked choice voting to Boston city elections, and we were thrilled to see it pass the Boston City Council last month. It has since been signed by the mayor and now heads to the state legislature for approval. I understand the Commission is interested in the Boston proposal because it involves a kind of top four nonpartisan primary, followed by a general election with ranked choice voting, similar to the Alaska system. I'll provide some background on municipal elections in Massachusetts to understand how we arrived at that proposal. The first thing to know about municipal elections in Massachusetts is that they're virtually all nonpartisan today and have been so for decades. If you run for local office here, your party affiliation does not appear on the ballot, and there are no party primaries or caucuses to nominate candidates. In lieu of a party primary, most cities in Massachusetts, including Boston, hold what we call a preliminary election, usually 6 weeks before the general election, to winnow the field of candidates. In Boston, if there are 3 or more candidates in the race for mayor or district city councilor, a September preliminary election is held to narrow the field down to 2 candidates who face off in the general election. The benefit of the preliminary election is that by reducing the field to 2, they ensure that the winner of the general election has a majority of the vote. However, they also offer a number of downsides. They cost a lot of money to run. They typically see very low turnout, meaning a small, often unrepresentative fraction of the public decides which candidates make the general election. And they depress turnout by offering us fewer options on the November ballot. For these reasons, our default recommendation for cities in Massachusetts has been to eliminate the preliminary election entirely and just hold a single round RCV election featuring all candidates in November, as Councilor Morano suggested. While that's been our default position, that was not in fact our proposal for Boston. Since Boston has seen some very crowded races in the past, including 12 candidates in the 2013 mayoral race, we encountered unique interest in Boston in maintaining some narrowing of the field before the general. For this reason, our Boston proposal keeps the preliminary election, but instead of narrowing the field down to 2 in the single seat races, it advances the top 4 candidates to the general election, where voters can then rank those 4 options. Even with some narrowing of the field, this model will offer Boston voters more voices and choices in the general election, which is when most voters are paying attention. When I look at New York City elections, I see a similar problem to that of Boston, wherein voters are denied choices on the general election ballot, with many strong candidates routinely eliminated in the primary. In that light, moving to nonpartisan elections might seem like a clear win for voters, but I don't think the decision is so simple. As I think most political scientists will tell you, partisan elections give voters important cues that voters rely on the ballot, and they help organize issues into coherent party platforms. With that in mind, one compromise sort of option to consider would be to adopt a nonpartisan ranked choice voting election, either single round or maybe top five. You're already ranking five. But with an important addition taken from Minneapolis RCV elections, which would be to allow the candidate to choose a political designation to be listed under the name on the ballot. In Minneapolis, the candidate can choose whatever label they want, Democrat, Republican, Socialist, Libertarian, Pizza Party, whatever. And allowing a candidate chosen affiliation on a nonpartisan ranked ballot might enable New York City to have their cake and eat it too. It could open up the general election to more voices and choices for all voters, while at the same time giving voters these political designations that they can identify with and rally around. And happy to take any questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Any questions from the commissioners for either Eric or Greg?
I think just one question for the gentleman from Colorado. So you moved to even year elections. Has it increased voter participation and turnout in a meaningful way?
Eric, that's a question for you. Has moving to even years increased participation?
Oh, thank you. I could not mute. Well, we voted on this issue in 2022, and as Mr. Weinberg previously mentioned, that there are a couple of implementations in how long it takes to implement this. So
Right.
our first even year election is actually in 2026. So I'm very familiar with the turnout in even years versus odd years. To give you an example, the turnout in the city of Boulder in 2024 was about 83%, whereas the previous election in 2023 for municipal election was about 50%. So we do expect a significant increase in participation in our election in 2026, which being an even year off presidential election should be in the range of 75 to 80%.
And interesting, none of you mentioned the potential savings to state and local governments by consolidating elections into the even year. So you eliminate the constant election cycles. You don't have, I mean, because I haven't heard anybody talk about that. There has to be some valuation of the savings.
Yeah, and I think that that's really dependent on a state to state and city to city basis. So it really depends on whether or not there will be fewer elections. In some states, that will be the case. In Colorado, we will still have elections in the November of odd years. Those elections will largely be only for state and local ballot measures as opposed to candidates.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Oh, yes, Rich, sorry. Oh, you are maybe muted, Rich, because we cannot hear you.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for Greg. I just want to clarify, you said that while your default recommendation in Massachusetts would be, if I understood you, to have a single election, no primary, but the recommendation for Boston would be to have a top X primary, given the number of candidates. Do you have a similar perspective on New York based on our recent electoral history?
I don't have a strong opinion on that. I think we went into the Boston conversation saying, let's eliminate your preliminary. We can save money by not having the preliminary election at all. And we received some pushback saying, hey, we sometimes have these very large fields and we don't know how voters are going to deal with 12 candidates on the ballot or what have you. And they said, okay, well, what if we look at top four? And that's how we arrived at that. And that decision, I think it's an interesting balance between Do you deny options from the general election ballot by having some primary or preliminary, and that denies some choice? But that can also simplify the decision voters are making by limiting that choice. So I think that's an interesting decision. I mean, for New York City, I would not consider top two. And in fact, in terms of top four, you're already ranking 5, so I would not really consider top 4. I'd probably make the determination, do you want to do a single round in November or do top 5 since you're already ranking 5? That's the decision I would make.
Julie, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks. Greg, I want to follow up on Rich's question for a second. And this might be a crazy idea, but one of the things I've been thinking a lot about this particular challenge of too many candidates. We have a mayoral election going on right now with arguably too many candidates. And so I'm thinking, is there anywhere where perhaps you could put in a threshold? And if you have, do you know of anywhere that does this? You can put in a threshold and it's like, you know, if more than 7 candidates, I'm making up that number, are in the race, then you trigger a primary. If you're under 7, then you have a single election.
Well, that's exactly what we do in Massachusetts elections. We have a trigger based on the number of candidates that run. And if more than that number of candidates run, you have this preliminary election today. And
what is that number? I'm sorry.
The formula is if more than twice the number of candidates run as there are seats. So if you're talking about a mayoral or district city council race where it's 1 seat, you're just talking, is there more than 2 candidates? Now, we changed that for Boston with our proposal, or we're trying to change it with our proposal, where a preliminary is triggered if there's more than 4 candidates. If there's more than 4 candidates, you hold a preliminary election to narrow it down to 4. So you could have something like that in New York City. If there's more than 4 or there's more than 5, you hold this, you call it a preliminary, you call it a primary, whatever you want to call it, to narrow it down to that number.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us. We are going to return to in-person testimony from Carl Unegbu, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, and Brendan Griffith, if you would join us. And I'm putting Paris Straughter on notice that you will follow. So Carl and Brendan. Please go ahead and pull the mic close to you.
Good afternoon.
A little bit closer.
Close. So thank you for having me. My name is Carl Unebu.
Hold on.
I serve on the community board here in Manhattan, and I am the vice chair of the American Constitution Society. But I have to say right now that I am not here as a representative of that organization.
I think if you just stay close and keep talking, it should pick up on you.
I hope it does.
Or we'll switch it. Could be dying.
Yeah, thanks. So, but I have paid attention to these issues in the various capacities that I have worked in the past, whether as a functionary of the Democratic Party or in my other situations where I did some research on this kind of issue. So I am here in that capacity, not as a representative of the Constitution Society. So first of all, my take on this thing is to, look, first, much of the concern about voting methods and the innovation about electoral systems springs from the low turnout in New York elections, which at this point is very chronic and abysmal. I mean, New Yorkers, they tend to pay more attention to things happening in Washington in terms of their voting pattern than voting in New York City elections, New York City where they live. So that's the problem. Now, I support in my think pieces that I have written ranked choice voting to be complemented by open primaries. Well, the passion with which I advocate this combination depends on the jurisdiction that I am talking about. I am not so concerned about ranked choice voting and open primaries at the federal level as much as I am concerned about that in New York City for two very clear reasons. One, New York City is almost like a one-party state. I mean, the city got sort of redder in the last presidential election, sort of more red, but still, it is a safely blue state. And if I were running for anything, I would be happier with my chances as a Democrat than as a Republican in any election in the city. So for that reason, the system we have here of closed primaries is a particular problem because the folks who are unaffiliated or folks who are Republicans, Democrats, as the case may be, usually don't get to participate in the primaries, especially of the Democratic Party, for instance, which usually turns out to be the decisive election in the city. So to that extent, they get disenfranchised when it comes to making an input in the direction of public policy. So that's a real problem. Now, to open up the primaries would introduce an element of competitiveness. With competitiveness comes some kind of uncertainty of the outcome, which then motivates candidates to engage more with the voters and for the voters to really care about the election in the first place. So for those reasons, I kind of think that New York City should adopt an open primary system to enhance voter participation. And I guess I'll be more inclined to answer more questions as time
Thank
goes
you
on.
so much.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Brendan Griffith. I am the Chief of Staff at the New York City Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO, which represents over 300 unions and more than 1 million union members across the 5 boroughs. We urge the Commission not to move forward with proposals to introduce so-called open or jungle primaries. These ideas are not new and they are not neutral. While some who support this idea may be well-intentioned, jungle primaries have also been backed by the same kinds of interests: billionaires, corporate groups that want to weaken labor unions, community organizations, and political parties speak for working people. When this kind of proposal was pushed more than 20 years ago, it came from wealthy interests frustrated that working class New Yorkers, through their unions and community groups, had too much influence. Even today at this commission, it is concerning that there is not a single member appointed specifically to represent the interests of the labor movement and working people. Unions and community groups are how everyday New Yorkers get a voice in the political process. We help working people understand the issues, talk to each other about candidates, and get to the polls. Labor is one of the most effective civic institutions New York City has because of our decades of organizing experience. When turnout increases, it's because unions, community organizations, and political parties are out talking to people. As labor organizations, we knock on the doors, we make the calls, we talk to our members in their workplaces and in their communities. Member-to-member outreach and direct voter contact are proven tools to bring working New Yorkers into the democratic process. If the Commission is serious about increasing voter turnout, we join our partners in encouraging you to consider aligning city elections with even-numbered years when voters are already showing up for federal and state races. This is a change rooted in data and in reality. And so, I believe there was an estimate from the New York City IBO that every other year the city would save $42 million if they did that. We cannot support proposals that would effectively sideline labor and other organizations from this process. Primary elections are one of the most important opportunities union members have to meaningfully shape the direction of their city. Replacing them with a process that rewards massive outside spending and candidate self-branding would not create more democracy. It would make it easier for the wealthiest New Yorkers to buy the outcomes they want while shutting working people out. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening.
Thank you both so much. Any questions from our commissioners?
Not questions, more comments. I hate to debate my brothers in the labor movement, but there's not a unanimity of opinion amongst labor organizations on this issue either. Some unions are supportive of the idea of open primaries, nonpartisan elections, because they see the same trend in their membership as disenrolling from the major parties, becoming unaffiliated voters, thereby locking themselves out of that very participatory process that unions have traditionally engaged in. In 2003, I was then the vice president of a city union at DC 37. We all engaged in an effort to defeat that ballot proposal that would have created nonpartisan elections. But that was a very different time, not just for the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the city of New York, but for the labor movement as well. And what we've seen in the past 20 years is voter participation, both among the general public and union members, has plummeted. And largely because voters they're telling us something. They don't like the product that they're being offered. And so I'm just curious as to if the union's ability to influence its members, to engage them in local politics, to get them to participate in GOTV efforts or campaigning for their preferred candidates, none of that would change. It would just be a different, they would be voting instead of a closed primary in an open primary. But that influence would still be there because that's the power of the labor movement. It's not the party. So I'm just curious as to why this deep concern that this would somehow marginalize unions.
Sure. No, I think that's a fair point. And I would just say that to find unanimity in the labor movement is for anybody that's worked with it, I would say, while not impossible, a difficult undertaking. So while that's not exactly what we seek, I would say that a number of the members of the executive board of New York City Central Labor Council support this position. In the conversations we've had, we've seen broad support among the labor movement. I think where we have concerns is that whereas a partisan primary, where there's a discussion of policy, through the Democratic Party, through the Republican Party, that would be diluted and it would almost become a contest of personality, which we have seen in some elections in the general election. I will say that, while voting trends have gone down, we are just going through a process and getting New York City voters used to ranked choice voting. Throwing another element into this can be challenging. I would also say that while it has decreased union membership, and union members have voted in an outsized way relative to the general population. And additionally, when you look at the numbers from the 2024 elections, even in a general, you see that I would say the percentage of Republicans who voted was higher than the percentage of Democrats who voted, as well as the fact that independent voters, less than half of them voted when they had an opportunity to participate. So, I think there are a number of challenges that this could say that this identifies, and as I said, there are very well-intentioned people that might be supportive of it, but I do think it would dilute the voice of workers and allow for outside interest to come in and have an outside influence.
I don't like to disagree with you, and I'll leave it at this. I think you guys are underestimating your ability to influence your own work, your own membership. They care more about what the union thinks than most political parties. So whether we move to open primaries, nonpartisan elections, final four, top two, whatever we decide to come up with, I think the labor movement will be fine, because the labor movement is the only organization that actually speaks for working people. No political party ever did.
I'll say I completely agree with the last sentiment in your comments. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you both so very much. Appreciate it. We will now ask Paris Strouder to join us, and I will put on Zoom on notice John Caney and Dan Schnurr. You'll be up after Paris. Good evening.
Good evening. Nice to start.
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Paris. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Paris Strouder, and I'm the Director of Planning and Land Use for the New York City Council. The Commission is rightly focused on New York's housing affordability crisis and potential solutions to deliver more homes for New Yorkers. Speaker Adrian Adams and the City Council share that priority. We've led on housing throughout this term, starting in 2022. We're on track to complete 5 neighborhood rezonings totaling nearly 50,000 units. More than 25% would be affordable. The City Council has approved in this time nearly 120 private site applications, totaling over 27,500 units, the majority of which, over 16,000 units, are affordable. the city council approved and improved the City of Yes zoning for housing opportunity text amendment, zoning text amendment, which will bring over 80,000 new homes. Council Speaker Adams proposed and the City Council unanimously passed the Fair Housing Framework legislation that will require a comprehensive plan for our housing needs by establishing transparent housing targets to hold every neighborhood accountable for contributing its fair share. Despite this clear record of proactive leadership, the Commission's discussion has centered on the alleged role of the City Council as an obstacle. This overlooks the biggest challenge to produce housing while selectively acknowledging how one part of government can be influenced to oppose housing and ignoring the executive's branch's vulnerability to influence. This ignores the very real and democratic checks and balances in land use decisions. The 1989 charter revisions replaced the undemocratic Board of Estimate with a representative city council that provided every New Yorker with an equal vote on land use matters. This change came after major outcry on land use decisions that were, outright racist and leveled Black and brown neighborhoods, concentrated poverty, and segregated the city by race and class. We know that without a check on executive control, appointed power brokers can destroy and remake neighborhoods. Recent events in our city have left New Yorkers questioning whether the mayor has our best interests at heart. And there's a growing trend of executive overreach being normalized. Our nation's president has led on that and created a constitutional crises, that undermine democracy and the separation of powers. Black, Latino, and immigrant communities are under attack after gentrification has contributed to increased displacement. I asked this commission, do we really want to go back to a time when communities had less representation? What guarantees do we have that the mistakes of the past will not be replicated? Can I continue?
Yes, please do.
No, we should make reforms that promote housing production and ensure accountability while preserving the power of local communities to have input in projects and policies that affect their neighborhoods. The City Council is the most representative part of the city government. Our members understand these communities at the most granular level. Mayors and borough presidents are no less affected by political interests, NIMBYs, real estate developers, lobbyists, etc. The checks and balances in ULURP exist to prevent one branch of government from becoming too powerful. But the council does support reform. The council agrees that there are certain types of minor or clearly beneficial applications where the ULURP process is an obstacle, including resiliency and sustainability related actions to protect against the effects of climate change. The council also supports reforms that build on the Fair Housing Framework Law, including prioritizing neighborhood planning efforts in community districts that are failing to meet their targets. Such ideas as requiring DCP, the Department of City Planning, to propose land use actions in response to the framework. Increasing accountability for community districts that fail to meet fair housing targets, such as requiring community boards to approve land use changes that would achieve fair housing targets, and providing them options and resources for them to initiate plans, as opposed to a plan that's always initiated by the Department of City Planning. Increasing the Speaker of the City Council's authority to hold council members accountable for advancing land use changes in community boards that are not meeting fair housing targets. This would maintain the council's power to engage and problem solve while giving the Speaker, as opposed to the council as a whole, the power to decide what comes to the council for a vote. The council wants to increase the capacity of the Department of City Planning and other city agencies to support communities willing to proactively plan and to help address the housing crisis. DCP often says no to communities that want to plan and want to rezone due to a lack of capacity. But the most effective way to sustainably build lots of housing, especially affordable housing, is to advance neighborhood plans and rezone neighborhoods. neighborhoods. We broadly believe that DCP and city agencies should be provided with increased capacity for engaging in proactive planning. The Department of City Planning should have a responsibility to engage the public around planning issues beyond rezonings, educating the public about neighborhood-specific needs for infrastructure and for new housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I might start with just a general statement. I think on behalf of my fellow commissioners, I think one of the things that we've been struggling with, which we've heard so much about, is how to really enforce something like the Fair Housing Framework. How do we keep people accountable to meeting those targets? You talked a little bit about how you propose to do that. One was giving the speaker more authority to hold those council members accountable. Can you talk a little bit more about how to truly enforce then accountability of either the framework or the targets or any other comprehensive measure that we might want to take into account?
Yeah, well, I think there's two components of that. There's, on one hand, providing, well, intention and resources around actually enabling land use actions that occur in those areas. So these neighborhoods that are not meeting fair housing targets. And then there's kind of legally, how do we actually hold the structures in the ULURP process accountable? So that, so addressing number one first, our housing crisis is not going to be solved through just private applications. If we want to see the needle move in these neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods that are not addressing the housing need and not contributing their fair share, we need to actually plan in these neighborhoods. And that's rezoning, but it's also about infrastructure, et cetera. So that requires resources, that requires intentionality. And I think there really needs to be something that directs the administration as well as city council to do that. And I think that could start with community boards by actually giving them the tools and giving them increased power with, again, the directive that they have to actually meet those housing targets and that they're not going to be able to avoid that. So that's one. On number two, there's ways that, I mentioned giving the speaker more power as opposed to the council as it relates to applications that the council takes up for a vote. That's something that could be changed that would give the speaker more power relative to individual members and the council as the whole. And that could help in theory with this problem. At the end of the day, if our institutions are functioning properly, they require a certain amount of leadership, they require a certain amount of integrity, et cetera. They require checks and balances. That's a large part of what I've been saying today. You're not going to get out of the requirement that there's some checks and balances, but by giving the speaker more power relative to an individual member, it changes the power dynamics, and I think ways that could really influence land use outcomes where there are problems. And I happen to think the problems are more limited than has been talked about, but certainly there are problems.
And just one more question. How would you move the council members individually to reach that same consensus point that you're at?
How do we move the council members individually?
Yeah, to enable speaker authority, let's say.
Oh, well, I guess what I'm saying is that there's probably a legal way where you can just empower the speaker. So I think that's the thing to explore more. But in terms of, influencing council members and moving them to do what's needed, I mean, that's what I do every day.
Yes.
Every single day. And of course, Speaker's office has a huge role in that as well. And I should say other council members. People look at the council as like individual members when it comes to land use, but that's not actually how it works. The individual member might be taking the lead on negotiations, but the subcommittee members are involved. The land use committee members are involved. Speaker's office is involved. The leadership of the council, which is the speaker and certain key folks, council members, they're involved. There's a lot of kind of players in the mix to get to an eventual negotiated solution on the project.
Carl.
What you said that
Lean in.
I'm sorry, there's a lot in what you said that certainly was not comport with reality over the last 2 decades or 3 decades. And particularly the issue of member, that not working?
No, I don't think so.
Particularly the issue of member deference and the reality that I think one housing project in the last 2 decades or so has been approved over the council member's objection. And I think we're struggling with this issue of what is the balance between what a particular council member might want and the needs of the city as a whole. You talked about increasing, enhancing the power of the speaker. And as you know, one of the proposals that we're now considering is having an appeal from a negative council vote to a 3-party appeals board, basically, of the mayor, the speaker, and the relevant borough president. Wouldn't that be a way of enhancing the power of the speaker in 2 ways? One, empowering the speaker to have more influence over an individual member on the front end, and then in a position to correct miscarriages of policy on the back end.
Yeah, I think, I mean, on its face, that proposal, has some logic, right? I think where I disagree with you, Mr. Weisbrod, is that, there's been very limited times where the council as a whole has overridden an individual member.
I will say I was part of the last time it was done.
Yes,
And
yeah.
that was some 10 years ago, so.
Yeah, well, I was not here, but I was on the administration side as well. I was here. But anyway, I think that's a testament of success rather than failure. So I see it very differently. Also, there's what happens in terms of a public vote. What you don't see is the negotiation that happens behind. And there are plenty of times where council members have very legitimate concerns about land use proposals. And on the other hand, either the administration or developers are not willing to kind of move on those things, and actually figuring out how to get to a good place and get to a yes is extremely hard work that requires, like I was talking about earlier, interventions from other council members, interventions from folks beyond the individual council member. So I think that kind of inside process is not something that's widely seen. But because of that process, what you characterize as a long period of time without the city council overruling an individual member, I consider a success.
Well, let me just continue with that for a bit. First, I think you more or less accept my proposition that we want to give the speaker more power, and one way to do it would be to have the speaker as a part of an appeals process, as opposed to a veto where the mayor vetoes and the entire council simply overrides the veto in a process that we know has a foregone conclusion. So, and the second thing I'd just bring to your attention, which I know you know, is that we've had a lot of testimony here from developers, real estate interests, communities, and others, even from former council members, that say they won't even bring a private application into the EULA process if they know that the local council member at the end of the line is simply going to veto it because the council will back up that council member. And that's a concern that, while I agree that area-wide rezonings are desirable, and important, we do need individual rezonings as well. We do need small developers, particularly who have to invest a lot of money up front, being prepared to come through the legislative process and not simply be stared down at the beginning of it or even before the beginning of it by a council member who says, I won't have anything to do with this. I mean, it's a problem that we're really wrestling with. And I think we've come up with at least one way of dealing with it. And I think I'm hearing you saying that that's at least something you're receptive to.
Well, no, the appeal board is currently proposed is not something the council supports. But I acknowledge that it seems like, a solution that's balanced. I didn't say there was another thing I wanted to say about it. So just quickly, if you acknowledge me. I think the complexity of that structure and questions that it engenders for me is, well, what triggers the appeal? Is it every project? Is it certain projects? And also what I said in my testimony around, borough presidents and the mayor not being they are also able to be influenced by NIMBY interests, developer interests, special interests. So having that appeal body really kind of complicates the negotiation. City council's made a lot of success in terms of making projects more deeply affordable, bringing affordability to projects that weren't there to begin with, like if there was an MIH on the table, for instance. So the complexity of the negotiation process that is supposed to advantage local communities and local neighborhood residents through the city council member leading that process. I question how that appeal board, having 2/3 of its members from either borough-wide or citywide, how does that influence those negotiations?
Well, and it influences the negotiations by having the council members as a whole, and particularly a local council member, being much more flexible than he or she might otherwise be. But let me just go back to your answer to Ms. Greenberger's question, which I didn't entirely follow. I followed it in terms of the informal process, although I will say, at least my experience is that generally on area-wide rezonings and receiving proposals from communities, communities are, shall we say, much less aggressive in supporting housing than the city as a whole is, irrespective of administration. But on the legal answer to how the fair housing framework could be enforced, I didn't really understand what you were proposing in terms of how the housing framework could be enforced legally, other than more or less the arrangement that we're considering where the council speaker has a lot of power.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So one idea that I alluded to in my testimony is around how applications come to the city council for vote or not. Some applications are mandatory, which means that the city council must vote on them. Other applications are discretionary, and there's different types of discretionary actions, but essentially either the individual council member or the chair of the land use committee can call them up or not. And one potential tool could be a speaker call up, where instead of actions being necessarily automatically taken to the council as a whole for vote. So basically the council votes on whether to vote on those applications. It seems a little strange, but it's just what we do. Instead of the council as a whole taking that vote, it could be something that is in the hands of the speaker. And that does change the kind of politics around what gets decided to be brought to the floor. And then there's other precedents for this. It's not unlike the way certain committees are intended to work, particularly at the national level. You don't see that as much on the city level because the council makes their own rules on legislation, but that's like one alternative idea is looking at the ability for the speaker to say what comes to the council for a vote as opposed to the council as a whole.
Well, they used to have that ability. And the council itself could restore that ability to the speaker, just like they took it away.
Yes.
Sure, through council
So
rules, yeah.
they don't need a charter change for that.
Correct.
It's a behavior change. And do you think, Anita, you have a question? I want to
I do.
recognize you.
Hi, Paris. I just wanted to say a thing and then ask you a question. You know, I think we on the commission all agree that we really have a true crisis in terms of the production of housing in the city. It's a crisis. We're not anymore able to just incrementally increase the number of housing units if we don't want people to end up having to flee the city. So we are really struggling here to find something that will sort of change the dynamics of the number of housing units on an annual basis that are created through our land use process. And, you know, I heard all of the things that you said, but I didn't understand from those things what of those things is going to drastically increase the number of units. Because one of the things that we heard from the very outset of people who've studied this all over the country is that the aldermanic privilege that we're talking about right here is one of the things that in almost every city in the country stands in the way of production, because small neighborhoods have parochial interests that need to be protected through their elected representatives. And the system that we have, where the individual council members are deferred to in land use decisions, is a reason that we don't get more units. And I mean, in all my years working with the city, you can't tell me that there's no truth to that. Even if a rezoning is approved, there typically are less units that come out of the end of it than there would have been at the start of it. And so I just am wondering what it is in your thoughts that would change that to allow us to get more units, because I don't see it other than doing something to change this structure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think, so I'm not going to say that that some certain applications do not come through or don't start the process or aren't right-sized, I would say, through the process. But I think talking about the scale of the housing crisis and the scale of the intervention we need to move the lever or move the needle on the housing crisis, it's not going to be private applications from individual developers across the city that change that. I mean, that's a part of it, but it's a smaller part of it. What is needed to actually affect the housing crisis is neighborhood level interventions that are at times transformative. You know, what we're doing in these 5 neighborhoods is really unlocking a lot of housing opportunity. It's making a big change as opposed to smaller changes, and it's unlocking a lot of units all at the same time. In my mind, we should be doing this much more than we're doing. And I understand capacity constraints, you know, I understand budget constraints, but we're not going to unlock a whole bunch of new housing, even if we made a lot of housing as of right. Like if we started allowing a lot of density in low density areas, which you're not proposing to do, at least I hope. That doesn't necessarily, won't necessarily move the needle either, because there's reasons beyond zoning that those low density neighborhoods are often underbuilt. I recognize zoning as a major obstacle and parochialism is a major obstacle, but there's also market conditions that are a real obstacle to housing development of scale in those areas. We need to increase housing where it makes sense to put housing, where there's infrastructure to put housing, you know, and along with infrastructure that could be improved to enable more housing in those areas. It's a real planning effort that I've worked in other cities. Other cities are way ahead of us on this front, in part because we don't have a comprehensive planning process. We don't have real kind of neighborhood planning infrastructure in this city. And I think, I didn't mention comprehensive planning in my testimony because there's issues with that as well. I know others have testified around that, but the neighborhood planning piece and thinking through zoning interventions, they're at scale and not reliant just on individual private applications is really how we move the needle.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate it. We're going, excuse me, back to Zoom to hear from John Caney and Dan Schnur. And while we're doing that, I will remind others online, there is an online form if you wish to testify. So please make sure you take advantage of that. And I would ask both John and Dan, John, you'll go first. If you would then stick around while Dan speaks in case we have collective questions.
Great. I'm John Caney, Executive Director of reInvent Albany. We advocate for transparent, accountable New York government and fact-based public policy. We've drafted and passed dozens of city and state laws, and government officials and journalists often consult with our staff experts. So this commission's preliminary staff report emphasized many longstanding concerns about very low voter turnout, embarrassing low turnout, and noted that 1 million New York City voters are unaffiliated and can't vote in party primaries, including the New York City Democratic Party primary, which is extremely important for offices like the mayor. As an aside, I'd note that a person who's enrolled by automatic voter registration, AVR, which has been long sought by voting advocates, is not enrolled in a political party. It's up to them to reach out to their local board of elections to re-register. And that's an important thing that we should think about when thinking about unaffiliated voters. So today, reInvent Albany is sharing Professor John Mollenkoff's new estimate of the party affiliation of New York City voters by age, sex, and racial group, which he calculated at our request and we've provided to committee staff. Professor Mollenkoff is the director of the Center for Urban Research at CUNY Grad Center. He's known to many of you. He based this estimate on data from voter rolls and the American Community Survey of the census. And he's going to produce an update using more sophisticated statistical methods later in 2025. A detailed description of the professor's methodologies and sources are in reInvent Albany's written testimony. We encourage all of the commission to look at the actual data. It's pretty easy to look at. It's clearly presented. But I'm here to highlight a couple of things. One, regardless of sex or race, younger voters are significantly more likely to be unaffiliated with a political party than older voters. Here's an interesting thing. Black 18 to 29-year-olds are more likely than white 18 to 29-year-olds in New York City to be unaffiliated. So Black 18 to 29-year-olds are 27.3% unaffiliated versus white, same age group, 25.5%. Men are far more likely to be unaffiliated than women, with Asian men the least likely to be in a party, followed by white, Hispanic, and Black men. Young women are more likely than older women to be unaffiliated. Now, the gap between the share of voters aged 18 to 29 and 70 to 79 who are unaffiliated differs widely by race. And we've included a chart that staff can show you. But by far the biggest difference within a group is between young and older Black voters. The share of 18 to 29-year-old male Black voters that's unaffiliated is 294% higher than 70 to 79-year-old male Black voters. The share of 18 to 29-year-old Black female voters that are unaffiliated is 318% higher than 70 to 79-year-old female Black voters. By comparison, unaffiliated young white male voters are only 78% higher than older white male unaffiliated voters. The share of unaffiliated younger white female voters is about 67% higher than older white female unaffiliated voters. So you can see that there are a lot of new and interesting insights about New York City voters and what party they're choosing and whether they're even choosing a party that this commission should be taking a look at. And happy to discuss that more, but the table that we've provided your staff and the data make it much clearer. Now, New York, yes.
If you can quickly finish up, a few more seconds.
Quickly finish up. Now, if we had our druthers, we'd choose a vote once system like San Francisco has with no primary. That would require state action, legislation, which we do not see as politically viable and which this commission should avoid. Instead, we recommend the following: even year elections, semi-open primary, a top 4 RCV general election for citywide offices based on an RCV open primary, and top 2 general election based on an RCV open primary. We comment on all of those, and that's the order that we believe reflects the political reality of today and the benefit and risk of different approaches. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we do all have access to Professor Mollenkoff's study, so thank you for that. Dan.
Thank you very much for having me. I was very flattered to be asked to join you today. My name is Dan Schnurr. I am the former chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission, which is our version of the FEC, the campaign watchdog for the state. I also serve as the co-chair for the Reform California organization, whose work led to the redistricting reform that we implemented many years ago, taking the process away from elected officials and giving it instead to a citizens commission. I currently teach politics, communications, and leadership at the University of Southern California, University of California, Berkeley, and Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Public Policy. And I will regret to say that my testimony will not be nearly as exciting as the exchange over either of our city's housing crises. But instead, I will focus on the more mundane issue of moving elections to odd-numbered years, given the experience we've had here in the city of Los Angeles. You've obviously already heard a significant amount of testimony on this. Reminds me of the famous quote from the late Arizona Congressman Morris Udall, who once said at the end of a lengthy committee hearing, he said, "Everything that needs to be said has been said, but not everyone has yet said it." So please indulge me for a minute or two before you go on with the rest of your program. In 2015, Los Angeles voters passed a ballot initiative, Amendment 1, which would move our local elections for citywide offices, for mayor, for city attorney, and for city controller, as well as city council and school board races, from odd number to even number of years. And the debate surrounding that initiative was a familiar one. The attraction, of course, was the idea that there would be more turnout when there was a statewide or national race at the top of the ticket, versus the concern that there would be ballot drop-off, that given such an extended ballot, that a number of citizens would simply just not complete the ballot and would not address the local offices. I supported Amendment 1. I was a co-chair of the campaign and a signature of the ballot initiative, because I believe that while both are significant challenges, the biggest challenge is simply getting people to vote at all. And while ballot drop-off and ballot fatigue is a valid concern, it was less worrisome to me than getting citizens into the voting booth to begin with. The biggest challenge here, given the nature of our primary schedule, was not just ballot drop-off, but voter fatigue. The primary for local Los Angeles elections took place only a few months after a presidential election and within several weeks after a presidential inauguration. And so what we saw was not just voter fatigue, but voter confusion. Large numbers of the electorate, particularly voters from emerging communities, thinking to themselves, well, wait a minute, didn't I just vote in an election? Why are they asking me to do this again? So another incentive, of course, was eliminating that confusion. The result of the initiative passed by a sizable margin and was implemented for the 2020 election. The results were as follows. A Common Cause study showed that turnout in presidential years was roughly 400% more than it had been in local elections. But I think what's much more relevant to this body are the questions of drop-off. So let me give you a little bit of information, what we found there. What we saw when we just looked at the vote totals for local office, whether for mayor or for city council or school board or even for judges, we saw that roughly 33% of Angelenos voted in those local elections, which I will admit sounds pretty dismal until you consider that in the odd-numbered elections, between 10 and 20%, usually roughly about 15% of eligible Angelenos voted. So the number of those local residents who voted in those city elections more than doubled by moving to even numbered years on a ballot, the presidential or governor's race. To break that down even further, we found that of those who turned out for a gubernatorial or a presidential campaign, depending on the year, between 80 and 90% of them finished the ballot. Not just state legislative races, not just city council and school board races, but an infinite number of judicial races that were particularly low information elections. So 80 to 90% is not perfect, but frankly, it's a much better outcome than we had hoped when we originally advocated for Amendment 1. And the one other relevant result, which one of your testifiers mentioned earlier, is, of course, the financial cost of the city of Los Angeles. We cut the cost roughly in half because, of course, elections were now being held every 2 years rather than every year, saving tens of millions of dollars for the city budget. I'd be more than happy to weigh in as well if you'd like on the top two primary, because we've had the top two, or the so-called jungle primary here in California for over a decade, and I'd be more than happy to share our research on that. And I'd also briefly reinforce John Caney's testimony, which I was very impressed when he talked about the increase of non-affiliated voters in the younger generation. We've found the same thing here in California among voters, young people of all races and ethnicity. And my own conclusion, for what it's worth, is it's not really a political decision on most of their parts, but rather a cultural and societal one. My generation, us old people, I grew up in an era in which there were 3 television networks, 5 buttons on the car radio, and 2 political parties. We were accustomed to a finite number of choices in almost every aspect of our lives.
Yes.
Millennials and Generation Z, of course, have never known a world in which they did not have an infinite number of options for information, for opinion, and entertainment. So the fact that they are rejecting an artificial binary set of choices should not be surprising to us. And if we have time, we will. I'd be eager to hear John's thoughts on that also.
Thank you so much.
Wind
I would
up.
ask that if you have specific data that you can share, that you submit that to us. That would be great. And I will ask my commissioners if there are any questions for the two of you. Terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you both for weighing in, especially from afar. We appreciate it. I'm going to ask Marla Simpson and Rob Ritchie to join us in the front. And following those two, I will put Lee Drutman and Scott Kendall on notice via Zoom. Marla and Rob, welcome. Nice to see you both.
Hello. Good evening. I want to make a note that I'm testifying in a personal capacity, having nothing to do with my current employment. And with apologies, I'm here to testify on a couple of obscure land use issues, one having to do with disposition, one on the city map, and one on building addresses. During the 1989 charter revision, I led a community organizing effort on behalf of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. The folks we represented put a lot of attention on public land disposition and saw the Koch administration policies as contributing to gentrification in their neighborhoods. The city and state owned huge amounts of land in lower income communities, about 2/3 of East Harlem, for example, and city supported development at the time was generally unaffordable to current residents. So the 1989 commission initially proposed to treat residential land disposition as a completely technical matter that would be decided by the professionals at city planning. Don't get me wrong, I like the professionals at city planning. I married one, but there was not to be any meaningful role for local community or their elected representatives. So our group blanketed the hearings that spring and summer, and the folks we represented made the point that they did not see city planning as being accessible to them for input. So, and I think I am the one who coined the phrase that was used by Chairman Schwartz when I said that for our communities, city land use disposition was the functional equivalent of zoning, at least at the time it was being operated then, and that we needed a role for elected representatives in those decisions. But context matters. If you look at the convoluted framing of Section 197D, it shows that the fight in 1989 was not about affordable housing. We protested the tendency to stick wildly unaffordable housing and commercial development in the places where housing had historically been affordable. We did not object when the commission limited review process or tried to limit review process for HDFC transfers. I can't tell you here with the benefit of hindsight that we would have supported a fast track process for all affordable housing, no matter what the scale, but I am certain that we were not trying to slow down the production of affordable housing. We were aiming at the other end of the spectrum. So that's my bit for historical context there. Following the charter adoption, the Honorable Ruth Messenger, who was the incoming Manhattan Borough President, invited me to help shape her new land use role, and I served there as the Director of Land Use Planning and later as counsel. Among other things, I oversaw the work on the city map and on address assignment, which were functions that were untouched by the 1989 charter and basically date from the city's consolidation circa 1898. There are real public health and safety reasons why it's important to keep address numbers in logical order, but in practice, by encouraging property owners to show how very special their building is by adding a new vanity address, this becomes a city subsidized marketing tool to enhance the value and sale price of property. It also generates a lot of lobbying, and those requests are often granted to the detriment of first responders and ordinary pedestrians. We had limited success trying to rein this in, and I urge you to consider centralizing the function and, if possible, imposing a recurring fee structure that would recognize the significant cost that this results in for communities, particularly for first responder maintenance. One more thing on map?
One more thing.
Okay. On the map, I know that there are interests that probably prefer to, again, leave this untouched, but it really doesn't make any sense to me. I supervise the engineers on the topographical function, and we did not exercise any meaningful role on the city map. We troop over to city planning, their architects and engineers would tell us what to do, our team would go back to our office and function more or less as technical stenographers. And so even if the BPs do in some areas exercise more substantive role, in the 21st century, this paper process needs to be modernized. There are technical tools that could yield swifter and more accurate outcomes. I've seen the work up close, and I cannot think of a reason why it shouldn't be automated and standardized citywide.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity to share my insights about potential changes to improve elections in New York. My congratulations for your service and for your detailed preliminary report. My name is Rob Ritchie. In 1992, I co-founded the nonpartisan organization For Vote and ran it until 2023, becoming known as the National Authority on Ranked Choice Voting. I'm now president of Expand Democracy, a nonprofit seeking to catalyze conversation about pro-democracy ideas. While consulting for groups like Fair Vote, Reinvent Albany, and Unite America, I speak only for myself today. And I do have this written testimony that can be available to you with lots of fun appendices and things. Let me start by ranking reform options without factoring in legal and political considerations. First choice, hold a single RCB election in November, like Frank Morano suggested, with 3 member districts for city council and a short turnaround mayoral runoff if no candidate earns 40% of first choices. Second choice, hold an Alaska-style top 4 primary system with RCB in November. And third choice, adopt Maine's model of RCB in the primary fall, followed by RCV in November. Turning to your decision, I'll note that RCB was debated for years before finally earning consensus support for its use in primaries, including from the 2019 Charter Commission and then 74% of voters. While all candidate primaries have been long debated, I don't yet see a similar consensus for change. Proposing semi-open primaries may be an easier first step to tackling the problem of more than a fifth of your registered voters being unaffiliated, and you heard a lot of good data about that from reInvent Albany. Democratic-run legislatures this year passed semi-open primaries in New Mexico and Nevada, as did Maine in 2021, paired with RCV at 173% in Washington, D.C. in 2024, when voters backed it by a greater than 2-to-1 margin in every city council ward. But if you instead proposed an all-candidate primary that winnows the field, I would strongly counsel Alaska's model of top 4 elections. My reasons are as follows. Make use of the RCV instrument you have created. The city and its Board of Elections should be commended for how it has implemented RCV. It's not been flawless, but 99.7% of voters in 21 cast valid ballots and nearly 90% ranked candidates. Voters like RCV and would allow them greater choice in November. Giving, make sure avoid the perception of boosting billionaires. The most likely tack, which you've already heard, against all candidate primaries is that they boost wealthy donors. Going to top 2 makes that attack more credible. It will take more money to advance from the primary, while independent expenditures are most impactful in highly negative campaigns. Top 4 would make it easier to advance and reduce negativity by avoiding zero-sum politics. Giving emerging candidates a longer runway. Primary turnout will remain far smaller and less representative than in November. Former Alaska Congresswoman Mary Peltola won in 2022 after finishing 4th in the primary. And the popular new mayors of Portland and San Francisco likely would not have advanced from a top 2 primary despite ultimately winning comfortably with RCV.
One last thing.
Have a system that encourages a larger reform coalition. I believe Republicans did not contest with top 2. With top 4 in RCV, they would have others reflecting your city's pluralism. And there's a number of specific provisions that I think would make whatever you propose better. And so take a look at those when you have a chance to see the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Any questions for our panelists? Thank you both. And if you would please submit those specifics, that'd be helpful. And Marla, thank you. I've learned more about the Topo office than I ever thought I needed to. So appreciate the ongoing interest. We're going to go back online to hear from Lee Drutman and Scott Kendall. So Lee, you're up first, followed by Scott, and then we'll open it up for questions if there are any.
Okay, well, wonderful to be with you as a native New Yorker. I was born in Queens, although I live in Washington, D.C. now. I'm delighted to have this opportunity. I'm a senior fellow at New America, a Washington, D.C. think tank, also a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, and also a huge electoral reform nerd. It's kind of my thing, so I'm really tickled that maybe some of this knowledge might actually be useful to you all. I kind of make it my business to try to read like as many studies as I can, which, you know, is probably now in the hundreds. And, you know, basically a nerdy political scientist who just is kind of obsessed with this. So don't rely on any single study. It may shock you, but some of the research out there has an agenda behind it. So look at the big picture. So you are interested in whether some form of open primary can increase voter turnout. Here's my first point. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but looking across all the studies, the effects are pretty weak. Basically, statistically, 0. And this is true whether you call it an open primary, a jungle primary, a blanket, or nonpartisan primary, 0. 0 effect on turnout. So basically, changing who can vote in primaries does almost nothing to change who actually votes. This is my summary across many studies. And actually, the reason here is quite simple. Primary elections, no matter what the rules are, they engage the already engaged. No reform changes that. The only thing that actually engages more people is exciting campaigns and inspiring candidates and competitive elections. So we're here a bit about California, and that's a good case study to see what happens when you change the primaries. In 2012, they moved to this top two system, and turnout before they did that was actually a little bit higher than after they did that. And I don't know if I can share my screen here. Am I allowed to do that? I'm sending a request to see if I can share my screen just to show you one quick table here.
I don't know that we can do that, but you can
Okay,
certainly
well,
submit it and we
I'll
can
just
make
tell
sure
you
we
the
update it.
statistics then. In the era 1998 to 2010, before California reform, the midterm primary turnout was 29.8% on average. After the reform, the next 12 elections, it was down to 28.5%. So actually, it was lower after they passed the reform. Now, number of reasons for that. Also, there are folks who think, well, if we do this top two thing or nonpartisan primaries, there will be more moderation. And again, preponderance of the studies, no effect. There are a few studies that show a positive effect. Most show no effect. So I wouldn't bet on that. So point number one, no real effect of changing primary rules. Now, if we are concerned about engaging and inspiring voters, we have to understand something about politics, which is that politics is about organizing. Politics is a team sport. Politics is about getting the people who agree with you together and to show up. And political parties are the most effective institutions for mobilizing and engaging voters. Strong political parties make for strong democracies. This is really political science 101, although it may seem counterintuitive to some folks who like independence. And yes, there are a lot of voters in New York who choose to register as independents. Remember, this is a choice. And they think that that means that they should be able to vote in the Democratic primary. But this is the thing that I really don't understand. They actually can. All they have to do is change their registration to be a Democrat. It's free, it's easy, anybody can do it. Folks really feel strongly about independence from Democrats or Republicans. There is another option in New York City. They can organize, start a new political party to compete in the general election. And New York City actually has a long tradition of new parties and changing parties, thanks in large part to fusion voting. So general elections could absolutely use more competition. And that's when the voters mostly show up. So if we care about voter engagement, then maybe we should have more parties competing in the general election. Maybe we should have citywide proportional
Thank you.
representation. And if we want young voters, same-day registration is the best way to do that. So
Thank you
I would
so
say-
much. I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
There are other people who've gone for like a lot of minutes here. I'm sorry.
No, I
I'm
know.
delivering maybe the news that you don't want to hear.
We're
But-
going to move on. Thank you so much. If you have additional testimony, you can certainly submit.
Okay, I'm
Thank you so
sorry I'm
much.
delivering the news that you don't want to hear, but this is
No,
what
it has
the
nothing.
academic studies say.
You're over time. That's
Yeah.
why. Thank you so much. Thank you for respecting that. Scott Kendall.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate you all taking on these issues. My name's Scott Kendall. I'm an attorney here in Anchorage, Alaska. I was the author of our ballot measure that gave us top 4 primaries and RCV here, what they call the Alaska system, which has gotten some discussion. I do want to dispel a little bit of the misinformation that came out. Whether it's that it delays results or that it's confusing. It's actually not true that it depresses turnout. Our turnout did not go down. In fact, we polled our voters both times they've used the system statewide. Over 80% said it was simple. Over 70% supported the open primary portion of it. It is an unhackable system. It's a system that has been battle tested in fields of up to 48 candidates. When Representative Don Young passed away, it performed beautifully. As was discussed by Mr. Ritchie, it opens up the field, 4 people get on the ballot, and Mary Peltola, who was the 4th place finisher in the primary, who was not actually supported by the Democratic Party as their primary candidate, but as a candidate of excellent quality, actually came in first in the general. So including that broader field is meaningful. and resulted in the historic election of the first Alaska Native member of our congressional delegation. The appealing thing about this system is every vote counts the same. You don't have to artificially change your party. You don't have to change your party back and forth. You show up and I pick up a ballot. I can vote for Democrat Mary Peltola on the same ballot that I vote for Republican Lisa Murkowski, and it just works. Every voter's vote counts the same. Every voter can vote for every candidate. Every candidate, whichever party they're in, minor party, nonpartisan, unaffiliated, gets to appear on that primary ballot. They don't have to gather signatures. They're treated no differently. One thing that's very fascinating was that this system in just 2 election cycles has resulted in a state legislature that is more representative of Alaska's population. We are a majority non-white in Alaska. We are actually the most diverse state in the country. We have the most diverse city in the country. And lo and behold, 2 cycles in, we have elected for the first time a majority of women to our legislature. We have elected the most Alaska Native candidates. We've elected people from the Filipino community, African American community. Our legislature isn't quite there yet, but our legislature has actually begun in just 2 cycles to look a lot more like the population of Alaska. No longer do candidates feel like they have to wait in line behind the party's preferred candidate before it's their turn to run. Everyone runs. It's free market elections, make the best candidate win. And we do have, in addition to changing who gets elected, though, it's important that it changes their incentives once they are elected. A lot of incumbents were reelected under the system, but their behavior has changed meaningfully. We now have 2 bipartisan majorities, Democrats, Republicans, and actually some independents governing both our state house and our state senate. And this year,
Thank you.
they adjourned early and they actually passed a historic boost to education funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that perspective. Appreciate both of you. Any questions? Julie.
Scott, this is for you. Something you said just now kind of resonated with me, and I just wanted to ask you to expound on it a little bit. You talked about how younger candidates no longer feel they have to wait in line. And I'm curious if you could just dig in a little bit on kind of candidate attraction or kind of what you're seeing in the pool of candidates.
Yeah, it's open competition. So for example, there was an urban, taking Mary Peltola for an example. There was an urban Democrat who was sort of formally supported by the party. He was from Anchorage, the largest city in the state with half our population. Mary Peltola was a former state rep from a village of 3,000 people in rural Alaska. And she didn't care that the party had a favorite. She ran anyway. And because of her quality as a candidate and the way she sort of electrified folks, she made it into the top 4. And again, that trajectory continued. So, there's a lot of that. I'm sure you see it in New York. We see it here where the party sort of nods at the person they'd like to run next, or they would discourage strongly people who challenge incumbents. They discourage people, quote unquote, primarying them. Well, primarying is no longer a verb here. If you're a decent incumbent, that's the other thing. You probably are going to make the top 4 and get back on the ballot and face all your constituents. So the whole focus of the system is wide open competition, but also pushing that competition to the November election, not the primary election. In most states, that's where the races are decided. 85% of races are decided in the primary. Now our competition's pushed to November when everyone shows up.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, both, for participating. We are going to return to in person, and I would thank those of you who have been very patient. We do have just under 20 people left to testify, so we will try to move quickly here. So I'm going to ask Gwen Mandel and Diane Buscemi to come up. They will be followed by Lisa Dombrow and Zach Vieira. So Gwen and Diane, thank you for your patience. Go right ahead.
Hello, commission members. I'm really happy that the Charter Revision Commission is considering the current way our candidates are elected in New York City. Currently, over 1 million voters are prevented from participating in the most critical round of voting, the first round, because we choose to be independent. I am one of those voters. And I'm offended, quite frankly, when I've received various solicitations maintaining that I should change my registration in order to vote in one of the primaries. I have chosen to be independent for a reason. So have millions of other independents, those who are registered as such, and the many who grudgingly choose a party because it's the only way they get to vote. The numbers, by the way, who identify as independent nationally are between 40 and 50% of the population, according to the latest Gallup polls. We should not have to choose a party in order to participate in taxpayer-funded elections. I'm independent because I believe that not being beholden to a party is the best way to choose candidates that will prioritize our democracy and have the best interests of New York City residents rather than the interests of their party. We have a system that has quashed innovation and produced elected officials who don't work on behalf of our city's residents. Having elected officials who are rubber stamps for their party has led to bad public policy. Having an open system where the best candidates are considered on their merit will create a better functioning and healthier city. We have elections where millions of people don't vote, not only those of us registered independents who are unable to participate in the primaries, but also millions of others who don't believe their vote is going to have an impact in the current state of affairs and who are losing faith in our democracy. Increasingly, these are young voters and voters of color who make up a large block of New York City independents. I'm a leader of independents. I'm director of leadership development at the Organization of Open Primaries and also a founder of a highly successful national spokesperson training for independents. I've talked to thousands of independents over the years, and while they vary in their reasons for being independent, whether it's because they want to elect the candidate of their choice, or they don't believe the current system is working, or any number of other reasons, they're typically passionate about their independence. Despite what the media and pundits report, these are educated and informed voters who can make a difference in bettering our democracy. We need open primaries now in New York so that we can have competitive, healthy elections where all voters can participate. One final note, as you explore different forms of open primaries, I would ask that you don't make complicated and unpassable what is very simple. Just let independents vote. Let's do it now.
Thank you so much. And could you state your name?
My name is Gwen Mandel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You need the mic.
Good evening, everyone, commissioners, and thanks for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Diane Buscemi, and I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I've been an independent since the 1980s and was a field organizer with Dr. Lenora Fulani's independent presidential campaigns and worked with her on political reform issues over the years. I've been a reading and ESL teacher for over 50 years, right now teaching at a community college in the CUNY system. It's been over 4 decades since I've been able to vote in a primary election that my tax dollars pay for. That's a long time. There are over 1 million New Yorkers like me who find themselves locked out of crucial elections because we do not wish to join a political party. We are not allowed to vote in primaries, which all too often are definitive. Sorry, I keep losing it. I'm so glad that this commission is looking at the undemocratic way our primaries are structured. I have colleagues and friends across the country in San Francisco, Oakland, Boston, and others who are shocked when they hear that I can't vote in the primaries because they can. In fact, most cities use an open form, a form of open primary. So I really don't get what's hard about this, that it's hardly a radical reform. Seems simple to me. Independent voters are the fastest growing group of voters in our city. We want our choice to be independent, to be respected, and we want to vote in primaries that our tax dollars pay for. By opening the primaries, over 1 million New Yorkers will be newly enfranchised, given the right to vote as who they are, independents. Opening the primaries is the right thing to do, the democratic thing to do. It's my hope that the commission will not miss this opportunity. No American should be forced to join a political party in order to vote. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Any questions? We appreciate you taking the time. No. Lisa Dumbrow and Zach Vieira. And just before you start, I just want to ask, ASL is here until 8 p.m. Will anybody be requiring their assistance after that? Okay, thank you. Lisa and Zach.
Hello, my name is Lisa Dombrow, and I just want to start by saying I'm a bit nervous about doing this. I've never testified before, but I felt that it was important to do so now. I was born and raised in New York City. I am an artist and educator living in Brooklyn, and I have been an independent for many years. I became an independent because I don't think any political party fully represents my views. And more importantly, I have come to see both major parties as prioritizing gaining and retaining power rather than trying to fix any of the serious problems we face in this city, state, country, and world. I should not have to belong to such a party in order to participate in the political process. No one should. I am a voter. I have voted in almost every election that I could since I was 18 years old. I was once a member of a party, but I felt out of my convictions that I had to declare my independence. Now I am locked out of the most important elections in the city, the primaries. Some say I can vote in the primaries. All I have to do is re-register as a Democrat or Republican. But I cannot do that. It would negate who I am and what I believe politically. That is like asking a Democrat to re-register as a Republican or vice versa for the sake of voting in a particular election. It is disrespectful to ask anyone to do that. Furthermore, as a taxpayer, I help fund these elections in which I am not allowed to participate. This is unfair and undemocratic. More than 1 million New Yorkers are in the same position I am. Many of them, as you have heard, younger voters and voters of color. We need to be encouraging more people to vote, not putting impediments in their way or shutting them out entirely. I very much appreciate your consideration of this issue, and I urge you to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Zach Vieira. I've lived in New York City for 5 years, and I hope to spend the rest of my life here. I want to start by thanking the commission and staff for putting together the preliminary report. I was pleasantly surprised by how engaging it was and impressed by how information dense it managed to be. And I especially want to thank Executive Director Alec Schoenbach for his beautiful letter and the reminder of how we might choose to view our beautiful city. Like any city, though, we're experiencing growing pains. As the report notes, New York City has been in a declared housing emergency since 1960, with a current net rental vacancy rate of just 1.4%. This clearly isn't improving. Every few years, the city council extends the housing emergency, but we haven't been able to dig ourselves out of it yet. I firmly believe that this is because we haven't kept pace with the demand for housing in the greatest city in the world. To fix that, we need to significantly increase our housing production. The report outlines a number of ideas to address this crisis, but I believe 2 areas have the most potential for impact: member deference and ULURP reform. Charter revisions targeting these structural issues could make a meaningful difference in our ability to build enough housing to meet demand and eventually reach a more sustainable equilibrium. On member deference, I don't think it's acceptable that individual council members can unilaterally kill building projects in their districts. I agree with Queensborough President Donovan Richards, who likened the current system to feudalism, treating council members as feudal lords who rule over land as though it were a personal fiefdom. If we want a more diverse, less segregated city, we need cross-district collaboration to support housing development equitably. A lot of what we know about how development decisions play out comes from the projects that do get proposed. But in many districts, developers don't even bother trying, as was brought up earlier in this meeting, knowing that under the current deference system, their projects are likely dead on arrival. As the report points out, In the last decade, some council districts saw no applications at all, and only 5 of 51 averaged more than one per year. That's deeply telling and troubling, especially since this practice isn't even codified in the charter. There's also real opportunity in reforming our land use and zoning procedures. ULURP, as it stands, is a long and complex process. Since I know this has already been the subject of much testimony, I'll just say I agree with the most common recommendation: consolidate the advisory portions. This would still allow for thorough review while avoiding unnecessary slowdowns. As Parkinson's law reminds us, work expands to fill the time allotted, and the example of the New York City subways being approved in only 1 week shows what's possible. ULURP is robust, but at this point, it may be too robust for a city facing an urgent housing crisis. Thank you, Vice Chair Greenberger and members of the commission, for your time and attention.
Thank you for your timing. Thank you both so much. Any questions? Thank you, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Cormac Slade Bird and Cleo Acevedo, if you would join us, and I will put James Innes and Chanel Porter on notice.
Good evening, Vice Chair Greenberger and commissioners. My name is Cormac Slade Bird. I'm a Brooklyn resident, data scientist, and for my third testimony, I'm discussing the hard ceiling we placed on by right housing. I analyzed all 857,000 New York City tax lots using the Department of City Planning's Pluto data set. Here's what the data showed. Only 27% of city lot area could hold a building even twice the size of what stands there now. Landmark protections, transferred air rights, and 90 special zoning districts cut that to about 20% citywide and just 12% in Manhattan. On 4/5 of our land, you're looking at the largest building that is economically feasible by right. Now imagine a miracle. Every economically feasible by right lot is built to its maximum size by 2030. Total citywide floor area would rise by less than 1/4, nowhere near what an emergency demands. That optimistic scenario, very optimistic, assumes no tenant buyouts, easy financing, perfect lot geometry. Meanwhile, New York State is on track to lose 3 congressional seats in 2030 because we are zoning people out of the state. Even under this build everything miracle, we would merely keep the same number of congressional seats. The council has renewed the housing emergency every year for half a century. Your preliminary staff report shows you deeply understand the depth of the problem. The executive director's letter spoke to me, and frankly, it should move every New Yorker. I have suggested specific fixes before, but tonight my ask is simple. Think big. Draft charter amendments that make room for the next million New Yorkers instead of daring them to live elsewhere. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Cleo Acevedo. I am a proud resident of the Bronx, and actually I live in this district. I am a 20-something-year-old New York City community organizer for Citizen Action New York. And I am here to talk about the election reforms that you guys are thinking and talking about. I am here to strongly oppose adopting jungle primaries or non-partisan primary elections in New York City. We've heard the argument that unaffiliated voters, those who choose not to enroll in political parties, are being excluded from the current system. But that is not the problem here that requires dismantling party primaries. It is a feature of representative party-based democracy, not a flaw. Political parties are voluntary associations of people who have the same values and shared missions. It's just like a lot of the members of my organization. They join Citizen Action because they believe in our mission and our vision to improve New York State and make it equitable and affordable for everyone. Primaries are not general elections. Primaries exist so party members can choose who they want to represent them in general elections. If someone chooses not to join a party, they are choosing not to participate in that party's internal decision-making. That's not exclusion or disenfranchisement, it's a consequence of personal choice. Let's not pretend that this is a justice issue, when in fact it is a matter of political preference. Allowing nonpartisan jungle primaries would weaken the ability of communities of color to build power through collective organizing within parties. Groups like labor unions, tenant organizations, parent advocates, and civil rights organizations often engage the electoral process through party structures. Usually around this time of the year, I would be doing get out the vote or civic engagement by registering people to vote. That's how we elect champions for our own communities. We don't want to elect just people with money or name recognition, which is what we would be doing by introducing jungle primaries. Because with jungle primaries, more people with more money who are not representing our communities and not representing the color of our community's skin are running for these elections and actually get more notoriety, because the more money you have, the more you're able to put yourself out there. Which is why, and if you actually want to increase voter turnout, we actually switched to an even year, right? And we also continue to fund programs like the Public Finance Campaign Reform, where we have more Black and Brown folks running on grassroots elections, where we have more community members whose dollars make more impact than corporations. Now, the argument is usually that jungle primaries often use the language of fairness, but the reality is that the system disempowers organized communities in favor of individualism and wealth-driven campaigning. It's a flat difference instead of recognizing power-diverse coalitions and movements. In cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, who we've seen how nonpartisan primaries have made it harder for working-class candidates, candidates of color, and grassroots leaders to compete in their elections and actually have lowered voter turnout.
Thank you both so very much. Any questions from the commissioners?
I have one, just a quick question. Thank you both, Ms. Acevedo. This whole issue of diluting voting blocks, in particular, folks of color, is very concerning to me. I don't want to speak for all the commissioners. I think so, right? Because we want to be sure everyone has the opportunity to participate. I guess one of the things that I continue to look at and be concerned about is there a natural dilution happening because less and less people, young people that look like me, you, or some of the folks that you're describing are actually registering to be in the party. So the affiliation, is it shifting now that we're going into different generations? So a lot of the data that we continue to ask for, that we're going to look at, I think is really important because, I understand your position clearly, but I want to be sure that anything that we propose is not backing us into a corner where we're losing the ability to have that participation that everybody, in particular, certain blocks of their generations before voted fought so hard to have that vote. So that, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
If you could just state exactly what your question is.
My question is, do you feel like folks in your generation, because you said how old you are, right, are less likely of color, are less likely to affiliate with the party? And that's my concern, right? So I understand, but if we have more and more unaffiliated people of color, then you have less and less ability for them to participate.
Yeah, the reality is that I actually changed my affiliation today to the Democratic Party because I was actually registered as independent. The reason why I was registered as independent is because I felt like there wasn't a specific party that represented my goals, right?
Exactly.
Like many people also think, right? But I also didn't vote in the previous elections.
Right.
Not because I didn't have a party representation, because if I really wanted to, I could have switched my party like I did today.
Right.
But what it was is because I didn't feel that there was enough of a campaign that called to me that said, hey, you should vote. What actually led to me voting for the not primary elections, but voting in general, was Kamala Harris running for president. And that was the first time I ever voted and casted my ballot. Now, the reason for that was because of her representation, her representing me as a Black woman, but also the fact that she's the second Black woman to ever run for the United States president. So I think the reality here is that the reason why we have low voter turnout and low affiliation to parties in younger people is not because they don't necessarily line up with the party, but more because we have political parties who are still moving in this ideology that you need to be a white man or a well-affluent white woman to run for public office.
We're not speaking to the issues, right?
Exactly.
And so, again, and thank you, I don't want to belabor it too long because and I'm hungry too. I guess the concern is this going to change, right? speaking to the particular issues of the community of young people so that they feel that they can register for one
Yeah.
party or another. And that's just, I'm just, at this point, I'm not even as I'm stating, that's my concern.
Yeah, no.
That's my conjure.
And I think, sorry, not to take up more time, but I think this is why I emphasize the importance of the public finance campaign,
Okay.
right? When you have people when you have a system where right, as a Bronx Community Board resident, as a resident of this district, right? Right now, we have City Council District 8 who is up for re-election because Diana Ayala is turned out, right? My $20 can make much more of an impact in this city council campaign than a corporation giving thousands of dollars to an elected. And that's the reason why we have young people's not that deeply invested in our parties, because the Democratic Party has emphasized much more funding from corporations and big real estate boards rather than actually its people, which is why we introduced the public campaign reform, and actually my organization took part in advocating for that.
I want to make sure we hear from Anita, who has a question online.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And my question is for me. I just wanted to ask you if you have any data that supports the things that you said about how in the places that have gone to the nonpartisan primaries, that people of color have been disenfranchised in terms of being able to run for office, because we really have to make our judgments based on some evidence, and beyond assertions that that is true, we would really encourage any data that you could give us that would help us to understand what really is going on.
Yeah, so I don't want to take much more time because I know that we're late, but I can actually submit all of the data that I have. We have a long, lengthy document full of data information, and I can submit it with my testimony online.
That would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. First of all, Cormac, it's always good to see you. You're like part of the traveling roadshow. On, I'm sorry, I missed your name. Cleo. There's an old expression in government that says, this is the way it's always been done, right? So when you look at our election system, this is the way it's always been done. And here's what we found in the past 40 years since the implementation of campaign finance reform, we were going to match low dollar contributions from people with a 1-to-1 match. Then we did a 2-to-1 match. Then we did a 4-to-1 match. Now we're at an 8-to-1 match. And with each cycle, guess what? Less people are voting. Less people are participating. Lower turnout, less of a and more people are disenrolling in the party. You yourself said, and this is not targeted at you, I'm just rattling, that you were an unaffiliated voter and you now join the Democratic primary process. You can vote in a primary. The primary in New York City has now become somewhat almost akin to the general election. And what that is doing is disenfranchising over 1 million New York City voters who have decided that they don't want to be part of a party. They don't want to join. And rightfully so, they shouldn't have to. So I think you're with Citizen Action. Citizen Action is a constituent organization, an affiliate of the Working Families Party, which is another party which spends most of its time trying to influence the Democratic primary process. I know that because I was a founding member of the WFP in a previous life. When I write my memoirs, I'll tell you all about it. But that party exists for the sole purpose of pulling the Democratic Party away, and they didn't want people enrolling as Democrats. So I'm just trying to figure out, why are we protecting a system which clearly does not work? It does not expand the franchise. It does not allow more participation. We're spending more money, getting lower turnout, and we're not having a true discussion about the issues that matter to all New York City voters, not just people who belong in small subsets of political parties. And you don't have to answer that. I just felt I had to, put those questions to you guys. So maybe you can think about that as we move forward. Doing things the way they've always been done has gotten us nowhere in this city, whether it's in voting or housing or a whole host of other things. Now I'm going to...
If you don't mind, I would like to answer. So the fact is actually, California since 2012 has adopted jungle primaries, what we call nonpartisan primaries, right? But according to California's data, the turnout has stayed exactly the same for the past 12 years, right? And so the reason why we're here is we're talking about voter turnout. We're talking about the fact that people don't come out to vote, but we're blaming it on the fact that, oh, it's because people are unaffiliated and they don't want to come out to vote. But what if the case is just because there's just simply aren't candidates who are actually listening to what the community is talking about? And then we have Alaska as well, who adopted open primaries in 2022. In 2024 primary election, turnout was reportedly the third lowest in 50 years, according to the Alaska Beacon. The data out of Alaska points to the conclusion that jungle primary elections do not actually have an impact on turnout, and if they do, it actually lowers it. So the problem here isn't that we have people who aren't affiliated to parties. The problem here is right now we're in Hostos Community College, which is located in the Bronx. The Bronx has had the lowest voter turnout in the previous primary elections. The reason why is because we aren't registering people to vote, we aren't educating people, and also we just recently introduced ranked choice voting in the previous elections, which is also confusing, especially to some folks who may not speak English and may not understand what they're looking at. My organization has done the due diligence to actually go about and provide training to these people, but that's not enough. What needs to be done is actually making it fairly accessible to people to vote, making sure that people have access to the information and understanding what ranked choice voting means, what it means to actually be registered in a party. And if you don't want to be registered in a party, that's perfectly fine. But you shouldn't be able to vote in a primary election that impacts that party representation. We're living in a representative democracy. Is that not the point?
Thank you. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here and exercising your civic rights. We really do appreciate it. We are next going to hear from James Ennis and Chanel Porter. I am telling Carrie Lobman and David Mertz that you will follow them. And then after them will be Jennifer Eng and Jonathan Christ Tompkins. So James and Chanel. That stays. Yeah. It's all good.
Good evening. My name is Chanel Porter. I am a Brooklyn resident, an entrepreneur, community member, granddaughter of a police officer, and I care deeply about making our city both safer and more accountable. Tonight, I'm here to testify on the need to adopt key reforms to give the Civil Complaint Review Board real power. I've lived in New York City for 9 years in various neighborhoods, from Harlem to Lincoln Square and now Brooklyn. In each of those neighborhoods, I've witnessed NYPD officers interact with, confront, or arrest my neighbors, and I've seen firsthand how officers at times can mishandle or harass my fellow New Yorkers. As we look at the state of our country and communities around our nation, I don't think it's hard to see or understand how our democracy is at risk. Doing my own research and seeing reports about body camera violations, protest policing, and other concerns in relation to the police force made me realize the need for accountability in policing processes and oversight. Far too often, even after a comprehensive investigation where witnesses have come forward, evidence has been closely examined, and a finding of misconduct has been made, there is no real consequence. These cases frequently end without accountability because the final decision remains with the police commissioner, who has overruled CCRB recommendations without public justification. Right now, the CCRB lacks the tools to hold officers accountable. Even when misconduct is confirmed, there are no real consequences. New Yorkers are losing faith in the system, and that can't wait. It's important that New Yorkers feel that their voice, their vote, and their representatives matter and are working on their behalf for the good of everyone in this city. At this point in our country and our city, it's important that power remains distributed across multiple groups and governing bodies. The CCRB needs to have more authority in establishing and determining results, consequences, and repercussions so that all of that power does not remain in the hands of one individual. I'm asking the Charter Revision Commission to adopt 4 essential reforms for the CCRB. The CCRB must have binding disciplinary authority. The CCRB must have direct access to NYPD misconduct records, independent board appointments, and term limits for interim chairs. These changes will move us from symbolic oversight to real accountability. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. My name is James Ennis. Thank you, everybody on the commission, for the opportunity to speak. I am a grassroots organizer with New York Communities for Change. Transparently, we're a founding affiliate of the Working Families Party, so I'll just put that out there. And I am here to say that we are against as well the jungle primaries system. Our work as grassroots organizers is fundamentally about building long-term relationships and empowering communities historically excluded from decision-making processes and power. Our mission is to increase participation, enhance representation, and foster trust and accountability within the political system. Unfortunately, we believe jungle primaries undermine these very principles. A jungle primary system allows all candidates to run in a single primary election, regardless of their party affiliation, with only the top 2 vote getters advancing to the general election. At first glance, this may seem straightforward, but in practice, it also results in 2 candidates, usually from the same political party, moving forward. Typically, these are the candidates with substantial financial backing or an existing name recognition. The consequence is smaller parties, independent voices are all silenced. This is a huge blow for communities just starting to gain traction and run grassroots candidates. Grassroots candidates make trust in communities. Grassroots candidates are members of those communities that community members feel confident and want to vote for. Jungle primaries actually suppress voter choice because it suppresses that grassroots movement. Moreover, jungle primaries don't level the playing field. They tilt it even more. Candidates of color and women, particularly emerging from grassroots movements, face significant fundraising challenges, even with New York City's general matching fund system. And for an example, you can just look at the mayoral candidates, Adrienne Adams and Jessica Ramos, and their fundraising, and you can tell women of color have a harder time fundraising than everybody else. And you heard my colleague earlier say why the establishment just tends to like white maleness a lot more than they do people from actual communities who know what's happening in those communities. As organizers, we've spent months educating voters about the current electoral system and the change to ranked choice voting. It was labor intensive, and it was an effort that involved knocking on doors, involving organizing community forums, and walking people how to actually do it. And that's something that we are still doing. Another radical shift in the primary structure can undo years of this civic education and efforts to make New Yorkers engage in the political process. We want to make voting more accessible, not more convoluted. We are the ones organizing tenants, fighting for school funding, and getting our neighbors out to vote. We do not have super PACs. We have people power. That's the only thing we have. We want to empower people in communities so that their voices are heard and that they want to run for offices, and they can shape their communities. And that's why we firmly stand against the jungle primary system.
Thank you both so much. Any questions? None online? Thank you again for being here. Truly appreciate your efforts. Carrie Lobman and David Mertz will be followed by Jennifer Eng and Jonathan Christ Tompkins. So Carrie and David. Go right ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you all of the other people who have testified. It's really been a pleasure to hear the different voices. My name is Carrie Lobman. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, a lifelong independent, and an educator. I strongly support putting open primaries on the ballot because our current system excludes millions of voters and silences an entire generation. Recently, in my college classroom, I shared an article with my college students about the primary system and how independents in New York can't vote in the primaries. Their responses were immediate and emotional. One student wrote, "It doesn't seem like a democracy if voters are being told their vote doesn't count, despite being a contributing citizen." Another said, "I was shocked that this is even allowed. It feels like we're going backward." And from a student registered as a Democrat, "I had no idea this was happening. I can't fully comprehend how enraged independents must feel, but I sympathize." These are young people trying to participate in a democracy. They're not disengaged. But New York's closed primary system shuts many of them out. And it's not just my classroom. Citywide, 49% of unaffiliated voters are under 50, and 26% are under 30. In contrast, just 16.7% of major party registrants are under 30. This is a generational issue. And it's not just that they can't vote, they're often left out of the conversation, therefore, entirely. We've talked a lot tonight about how do you engage people. Well, one of the ways people are engaged is they're targeted by the candidates who are running. They send out information to people in their parties, and unaffiliated voters rarely receive information about who's running or what they stand for. The result, millions of voters, many of them young, are told directly and indirectly that their voices don't matter. As an educator, I'm outraged. We don't teach about this in schools. I wonder why. We don't teach about the primary system in our civics classes in elementary schools because we know it's unfair. And if students understood it, they'd push back hard. And they are. Open primaries are about fairness, inclusion, and honesty. We tell our children they live in a democracy. It's time to live up to that. Please put open primaries on the ballot and let New Yorkers decide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for letting me speak. My name is David Mertz. I'm a longtime Bronx resident, father, union worker. I'm also a longtime member of the Working Families Party here in the Bronx. Moving to even years, and I'd like to talk about the voter participation part of the charter proposal. Moving to even years is an obvious choice with significantly higher voter turnout than odd years. It should happen. It's surprising to me, though, that with all the possible ways to increase voter turnout, the best and only other proposal the commission can come up with is nonpartisan primaries, a proposal that even your report seems to show that has little impact on voter turnout where it has been enacted. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. The way to increase voter participation is to make it easier to vote. If we want to increase youth turnout, let them register the same day. If we want to get overworked and busy New Yorkers to the polls, make election day a paid day off. Make it possible to vote at any election site in the city if we have that ability. We could make voting mandatory. I'm sure the city could use the money. I'm sure the commission could come up with all kinds of good ideas to incentivize voting in a new charter. That it hasn't is puzzling to me. Nonpartisan primaries will further shut out everyday New Yorkers from power and influence over the government policies that affect their lives because they strengthen the free hand big money, PACs, and wealthy donors already have in politics, and further handicap the organizations, unions, community groups, minor political parties, and others that New Yorkers participate in to empower themselves in the political process. Jungle primaries will continue the consolidation of power into the hands of the wealthy few. That's not strengthening our democracy. I would urge the commission to pursue elections on even years, but remove the jungle primaries proposal and make proposals that truly make it easier for New Yorkers to vote. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions? Thank you for staying around. I think online we are going to Jennifer Eng and Jonathan Christ Tompkins, and then we will have 2 in-person panels, Selena Avalos Jaramillo and Amy Tsai first. First, we'll start with Jennifer and Jonathan online.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Eng. And thank you for the opportunity to testify today. This is just a short personal testimony from a citizen and taxpayer of New York City. I was born and raised in Queens, New York. I've lived in multiple boroughs, currently reside in Brooklyn, and I plan to remain a lifelong New York City resident. It was very important to me to testify today because I do believe that a top two and a top 4 open primary would make New York City elections more competitive and fair. The stats I heard today in John Caney's earlier testimony were very concerning to me. Currently, I think that too many races are decided in low turnout one-party primaries. Voters who don't belong to a party, often the most independent-minded among us, are shut out. In fact, I'm quite embarrassed to say that I have in the past registered as a Democrat for the sole reason to vote in the primaries, although I fully identify as an independent and feel as though I abandoned my true values. With an open system where the top 2 or 4 vote getters advance, general elections would feature candidates who appeal to a broader cross-section of New Yorkers. And candidates would be forced to address broad citywide concerns, including things like the urgent need for more affordable and stable housing. And this would foster more accountability, ensure that candidates are focused on real solutions. I think democracy works best when more people are involved and represented. I would love to see us make sure that everyone's vote counts from the start, and appreciate the time to testify, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Hello, great to meet everybody. I'm joining from a beautiful sunny Anchorage, Alaska, where it's mid-afternoon right now. And I served in the Alaska legislature from 2012 to 2022, and I chaired or co-chaired the committee in the House of Representatives that oversaw elections policy from 2016 to 2022. So had front row seats and a lot of involvement and consideration ultimately passage of the Alaska reform that it sounds like you've heard a little bit about tonight and that your commission is considering. And I just wanted to relate a few observations from Alaska's experience with this reform that may or may not have value to you all as you consider what to do in New York City. I should add, I'm not an academic, so I can't speak to the sort of research or the studies on turnout or Black or Asian or other minority representation, female representation. All I can tell you is what I have observed in terms of sort of hard, real political and electoral realities in Alaska, which I think are overwhelmingly positive, is the basic takeaway. I mean, the net effect of the reform in Alaska is that the people who are elected are closest to the average Alaskan in any one legislative district. And so when you remove partisan primaries, and I'm a Democrat, when you remove partisan primaries, you're ultimately getting elected officials who are closest to the average Alaskan in that legislative district or the average Alaskan statewide for statewide elections. And I think that's ultimately a policy or philosophical choice if you think that is a good thing or a bad thing. There's testimony that suggests that parties and party primaries are ultimately a good thing, and the majority of a party should sort of dictate overall governance in the city. I ultimately think, even as a Democrat, that you want your election systems to represent the average Alaskan in Alaskan elections, or I think you would want New York elections to represent the average New Yorker in New Yorker elections. And the Alaska style reform basically affects that outcome. So I think there are second order considerations from the Alaska reform that are incredibly positive that I've observed in Juneau in our state government. And because the system, by electing legislators who are closest to the median Alaskan in their district, it effectively moderates the politics and it disincents extremism in running for the polls in the extremes in order to win party primaries, which are inherently a subset, non-representative subset of the overall population, the overall electorate. And so when you get more moderate legislators and you create an election system that incents collaboration, you get better governance. And in the 4 years since Alaska has passed its election reform, I would say governance, the sort of quality and function and collaboration of governance is at all-time historic highs. Scott Kendall, who I worked with closely when I was a legislator, I think spoke to this a bit.
Yes, he did.
But
I'm sorry to cut you
No,
off.
no. I'm so
You're out of
sorry
time.
for
No,
going
I
long.
would
I was just
say
gonna
if
say
you-
Democrats and Republicans are working well together, and thanks for the opportunity. to
Sounds like
testify.
it. And I would encourage you to submit a written testimony as well. Thank you both so much. I am going to ask Selena Avalos Jaramillo and Amy Sy to join, and then closing us out are Jaidev, forgive me, Fadki, and Louis Sosa. So Selena and Amy, please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Good evening or good night, commissioners. My name is Selena Avalos Jaramillo, and I'm testifying on behalf of the New York BIPOC Democracy Table, which is a coalition of organizations led by and serving Black, Indigenous, and people of color across New York City. We are united by a shared commitment to racial justice, civic empowerment, and building an inclusive democracy that truly reflects and serves all New Yorkers. We strongly support the transition of local elections in New York City to even-numbered years. The commission has rightly reviewed this policy in its preliminary report, and we urge you to include it in its final recommendation for the ballot. I know you have all heard extensively about this topic, but I really want to focus on the current system that New York faces, which is persistent levels of low voter turnout. Voter participation is consistently low, often under 24%, with even lower participation in Black, Brown, immigrant, and working class neighborhoods. In its 2022 report, Citizens Union found that non-white turnout for the 2020 presidential elections was 85% of the white turnout rate. And you guys want to know what it was in 2021? It dropped to 54%. Again, this very low voter turnout indicates that the current system is not working. It undermines representation during odd years and leaves our communities out of the decisions that affect our daily lives, from education to housing to public safety. And worse, in the 2021 mayoral general elections, the city faced a historic low turnout, with only 23.3% of eligible voters casting a ballot in the general elections, 23.3%. Shifting city elections to even-number years is a proven way to increase voter turnout, especially among historically marginalized communities. Another study that was conducted by Citizens Union examining 12 New York City assembly districts found that majority minority districts experienced the most significant turnout increase in even-numbered years, as much as 250% in Latino majority districts compared to odd year elections. Participation across demographics rises significantly when we vote alongside state and federal elections. And when this happens, more of our voices are heard and carry the political power that they should in a healthy, inclusive democracy. Folks, this policy is about racial equity. It's about ensuring that our democracy works for everyone, not just the few who vote in low turnout, low information elections. Our communities are already deeply engaged in neighborhoods, but the current election schedule places unnecessary barriers in our path. This policy removes one of those barriers. And some folks argue that this might dilute attention to local races. I know this was one of the questions, but the truth is that these races are already overlooked, and under the current system's abysmal participation rates. Again, we strongly urge the commission to move forward with this policy for the November ballot. Let New Yorkers, especially those whose voices have often been excluded, have a say in building a more inclusive, accessible, and representative democracy.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Amy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I have my written testimony available if you need it. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Amy Tsai, and I am a Bronx parent of public school students. I'm here tonight to oppose the proposal shift for a jungle, I am here tonight to oppose the proposed shift to a jungle primary or top 2, top 4 nonpartisan primary system. As someone who works alongside grassroots organizations like the Alliance for Quality Education, AQE, I see firsthand the power of community-led organizing to make change, especially in the fight for educational equality to Black, Brown, and low-income communities across New York City. The proposed jungle primary system would severely diminish the influence of grassroots organizations like AQE and would undermine our ability to elect leaders who represent and are accountable to our communities. Jungle primaries claim to promote fairness, but the truth is they simplify the influence of wealthy candidates and special interests while silencing the voices of those who have historically been shut out of political power. Under the system, the top vote getters, regardless of party, advance to the general election. Every candidate, regardless of party or of values, appears on one crowded ballot. In a high candidate, low information race without party cues, the the winners are usually those who have bagged war chests. The most named recognition or the backing of wealthy interests. Organizations like AQE build power to organizing parents, students, and educators to elect leaders who prioritize fully funded, equitable education for public schools. These are not always the candidates with the biggest war chests or the highest name recognitions, but they are rooted to their communities. Jungle primaries would push these candidates out early and deny voters meaningful choices to the general elections. And party primaries are where your voters are and organizing can make a real difference because it makes it clear who our politically friends and foes are. We know what happens in places that have adopted this system. In California and Washington states, communities of color have seen their preferred candidates, and I'll wrap up, eliminated in the first round, even to majority minority districts. Jungle primaries don't uplift underrepresented voices. Instead, they drown out with large money and media drive campaigns. I urge the commission to reject these proposals to protect the voices of grassroots organizations and communities, protect our communities' rights to choose leaders who reflect our values and just their bank accounts. Thank you.
Thank you both. Very much appreciate it.
But I did want to answer one of the questions that was asked about the fiscal impact. So even your policy, if I may answer.
Very quickly, if you will take the mic and do so.
Just really quick, so reducing the election administration costs and the long-term benefits of the even year policy. The Independent Budget Office found that in 2024, they did this analysis in 2024, so last year, that this shift would help New York City save 42 million every other year. So again, like this is, the fiscal impact of this policy, but also this policy would enable localities to save on costs associated with holding several elections each year. This includes printing ballots, setting up and operating voting equipment, recruiting, training, and compensating poll workers, and determining final election results. But just something else too that I want to highlight about this policy and the fiscal impacts of it is that what this policy does is that it allows the resources to be allocated for different uses in off-year elections. So now election administrators can think about improving accessibility of designated poll sites and physical security to upgrade to better protect election offices and employees. And we know that these, really quick, we know that these are becoming increasingly more necessary, with nearly 1 in 3 election officials reporting that they have been harassed, abused, or threatened because of their job. So that's why we strongly support this policy.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that very much. I do want to invite Dev and Louis to come up. I did misspeak. Those are our last 2 speakers in person. I will put our last 4 Zoom speakers on notice. Siddharth Ghoshal, Sebastian Hallam Clark, Kimberly Cruz, and Pamela Stewart Martinez. Okay. Thank you. And thank you for staying with us.
Of course. I'm Dev. I live in Queens. Thank you for putting the report together. It's a lot, and it's also very good. What the report does well is cover how open primaries would make candidates see voters with more nuance and see the wider swath of their electorate. I don't think what it covers, and this is why I want to talk about it, is how voters would themselves view their candidates. Just to illustrate something, so how it feels for me to register, right? I feel that when I register for a party, I'm essentially registering for a team. In order to have a meaningful vote and really have any sense that I'm participating, I need to sign up to be a Democrat and view myself in some at least subliminal way as a Democrat. That is something that some testifiers said is a choice. It's a choice to register in a particular party, and I could just not. But also I think that's an illusion of choice. So it influences how I ultimately need to pick a team, and There are only two teams, and there have only ever been two teams. Sometimes in the past, there are other sets of two teams, like the Whig Party, but that's irrelevant, I guess. So I guess I'm saying that it influences how voters view themselves. I also think it influences how I see candidates. I associate candidates with their teams, with the parties that they're part of. And I think that I'd rather see them as people with diverse sets of proposals and ideas to share. And I think putting them all in one ballot would help. I even think it could influence some Republicans to vote for Democrats, or at least rank them, and vice versa, though that's not necessarily very likely. I guess in other words, I think open primaries would influence voters and their hearts and minds in the way that they view the voting process. It would make them see people in more nuanced ways, and that's not covered in the report, but I think it's an implication. Also, I think people are asking for data. I'm not one of the experts who's written a book that you guys invited to speak, but I did read something interesting from the Bipartisan Policy Center in 2024 saying that open primaries reduce representational disparities by getting more young voters involved, essentially. The mean age of primary voters drops by about 1.5 years, and increasing participation of minority voters. Turnout disparities for Asian voters went down by 4.5% and 4.3% for Latino voters. So in other words, it helps make the electorate more representative.
Thank you so much.
Before my time starts, you guys have a question?
No, we'll take questions if there are any after both of you. No, it stays right there. It stays right there.
That was my first. That was before my time started. I just wanted to do that. Okay, so yeah, just being courteous. So we can start my time. Go ahead. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Luis Sosa, and I am a representative of Citizen Action. I have a decade and a half of experience in marketing, mostly focused in nightlife and concert promotion, and I've shared the love of helping people since the pandemic. Worked a few elections, worked in a couple places. So basically, I strongly oppose the proposal, and I'm gonna throw some of this out. Let's see, I got 3 minutes, so some of this I'm not gonna read. I'm just gonna freelance this. I oppose the proposal to move New York City to a nonpartisan primary system, the jungle primary, or the top two format. It doesn't solve low voter turnout. Engagement solves low voter turnout. And people normally engage with the people who fund them. And campaigns that are funded by the people usually have higher turnout by the people who fund those campaigns. My personal opinion. I would like to propose something different. And I don't know if this exists already, but maybe you guys can educate me. I propose a three-party system where we have a Republican, Democrat, and third-party system where parties can go into or come out of the main party system based on a number threshold, similar to the Whig Party, or my personal favorite, the Bull Moose Republican Party. Not sure if you guys ever heard of the Bull Moose Republicans. Even though I'm a Democrat, I'm considered far left from Astoria. You already know where it is over there. But yeah, it doesn't help. They reduce choice, not expand it. Like my brother mentioned here, we're part of a team. So you get to represent your team. I strongly suggest what we have now, the ranked choice voting, which is great. This guy over here helped with ranked choice for a long time. I like this guy already. Don't know his name, but he's pretty cool. I suggest ranked choice voting, but in a three-party format, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, where everybody has a chance to express themselves. I think that would give independents a strong, strong case to become the leading party in New York City over the next 25 years and maybe in the United States as well. So yeah, I don't want that jungle party primary, but I do think we should have a three-party primary, giving that third party the option to grow or leave. Who knows? Democrats might leave, Republicans might leave in a 50, 60-year time span. So that's it pretty much.
Thank you so much. Any questions for our panelists? She's asking you to send in your written testimony.
Oh, send you my testimony? Yeah, but it's pretty much what everybody said. Low voter turnout. There's 3 reasons for low voter turnout. Actually, another solution that I didn't mention, I've been a field director in campaigns. I've been a campaign specialist, event specialist in a campaign. And the main issue that we have on the ground is that we cannot go into mostly the new buildings, the newer buildings that are built that have doormen, and exercise the constitutional right to let people know that there's an election coming up. So while there are real estate interests who are backing elected officials of both parties and looking to get these buildings built, it also reduces voter turnout when we can't go into these buildings, regardless of party, regardless of how you feel about whatever issue. If we can't go into these buildings during election time, that's basically taking away the constitutional right from people.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And we will go back online. And we will start with Siddharth and Sebastian. We'll ask Siddharth to come on first, followed by Sebastian, followed by Kimberly, and then Pamela. You may begin.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Siddharth. It's my first time coming to one of these. Just a resident of Queens. Live in Flushing. So open primaries are something I'm kind of passionate about. I think we should have more freedom. We should have the right to be able to just voice our opinions, even if we aren't part of the correct team or whatever, And so before I go into any kind of factual thing, let me just have a really quick appeal to emotion, if that's all right here. The year is 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg has just happened. There's been a massive war, and the Union has just won, but a lot of people are dead from both sides, so Lincoln has to give a speech. And so Abraham Lincoln gives the following speech, and I'm going to just take a quote out of it. That these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I want to repeat one small part of that, if you don't mind. Okay. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The fact of the matter is Lincoln was very careful not to say of the party, by the party, for the party. He didn't say that. He said for the people. And so it goes without saying then that if this is what the sentiment was almost 2 centuries ago or a century and a half ago, that we probably should be having open primaries by this point. We should have people able to just stand up and raise their voice. Fact of the matter is the Republican Party here is 75% white. There's a bunch of people paid a lot of money to come testify today and say that, we actually think the primary should stay closed. Well, guess what? Some of the arguments they make are that minorities don't get a chance to speak. And if you had open primaries, suddenly a whole bunch of minorities would be able to get to pick the Republican candidate, which they don't currently get to pick right now. And so the simple fact of the matter is that we really should be having open primaries. We really should be creating a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And I'm really, really happy that the commission is willing to consider this question today. I only found out about this because I was trying to figure out who, is anyone even considering this question? And by some luck, 2025 happens to be the year that, this becomes a major question. And so I'm extremely grateful for that. And I just hope the commission does the right thing here. I hope they take the moral high ground. They do the thing that's best for our city. And that's kind of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Sebastian Hallam Clark.
Hi, good evening. My name's Sebastian, and I live here on the Upper East Side. I'm a member of Manhattan Community Board 8, but tonight I'm speaking just on my own behalf and not as a representative of the board. Tonight, I'd like to build on what we've been hearing about housing and democracy. On housing, I think we need to streamline the ULURP review process so we can build more homes and make housing cheaper. On streamlined reviews, currently, we know that so many of the housing developments have to be separately reviewed by a community board, a borough president, the planning commission, the city council, and then the mayor. And we know this is super slow and expensive. But every day that we could shave off those reviews is a day closer we can get to solving our housing emergency. And so to build more homes, we need to fast track as many housing projects as we can, create one-stop zoning administrative reviews, and compress that ULURP review process as much as possible. I'd suggest we combine the community board and borough president review stages and give more weight to the citywide and borough-wide elected officials over the views of individual city council members as a way to try to overcome those member deference concerns. So let's streamline the reviews to build more homes and make housing cheaper. On elections, I know we all want a robust democratic process where every New Yorker's voice can be heard. The problem is the high frequency of elections means that we get voter fatigue and low turnout. I've counted, and New Yorkers have been summoned to the polls, at least in my area, 10 times in the past 4 years, which is just way too much voting. To fix this, I fully support the proposals to move the municipal elections to even years, and then to replace party primaries with a single open ranked choice general election. Then, with a single consequential trip to the polls every 4 years, every New Yorker can have their say about who runs our city. So with this charter revision, let's try to streamline our elections and make every vote count. And on housing, let's streamline the process to build more homes and make housing cheaper. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Kimberly Cruz.
Hello. Hi, my name is Kimberly Cruz of Queens, and I just wanted to start with quotes. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." So I just really want to state, because we care about primary sources, I am a walking and talking primary source. I was NY6 congressional candidate in 2024, which was just last year. I'm walking and talking proof of why our democracy is a clear failure to any reasonable citizen on this land. As I've stated, I wrote a whole book, Hindsight is 2020, The Tree and Key to Democracy, and I published this October 2024 to reveal all the 222 primary sources that this commission has asked for. It's there. So these demographics that we're talking about are people, right? From a national level, a state level, and a city level, they can range in all the different colors of purple that there is. But the fact is that we don't have a local government. That is why we are here pleading for open primaries without really understanding what open primaries mean in a civil war. And like I've always said, as I testify, we are in a civil war. We have a sister city in Los Angeles that's dealing with their own gripes right now. So I don't want to stay silent. I'm an American patriot. And there is violence going on because they don't have freedom of assembly, they don't have freedom of press, and we as a public don't have freedom of speech. So the demographics of my city is NY6, Flushing is my home, and I speak all the languages that I can of my land. But I come here because voter turnout needs to be engaging and informed to have a healthy democracy. Our senators, which I will state right now, Senator Liu is a sponsor of a bill that is allowing our public parks land to be taken away from us. Okay, Citi Field is going to open up a casino, and the historic part of it is the origins of Shea Stadium come from 1957, so pre-civil rights. And when you think about the history of this land, you're thinking about Walter O'Malley, Robert Moses creating this new stadium with city funds. You're talking about the fact that we had to plead them to be there, and 5 days before the World Fair in 1964 is when they opened up. And then they dismantled this, right? They demolished this apparently in 2009 because the city charter asked for it. But the disrespect to the people of Queens, to the nation of Queens, because I'm pleading for it to be a nation and declaring it to be a nation very soon if we don't get a local government, because this is a farce of democracy. But the fact is that they were supposed to dismantle it, cover it up, because they didn't properly create revenue for the land of Queens. But then they created Citi Field, and they use that name because they get $20 million from Citibank to use that name. And the fact of the matter is that in 2025, they have the audacity to start lobbying in Albany and all that jazz when the people of Queens for the last 5 years since 2020 has said no. So
Thank you so
Liu
much.
sponsoring
Thank you. That
ma'am,
is
I
your
have
time. Thank you so much. Thank you for your testimony. Pamela Stewart Martinez. Do us proud.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I actually did not plan to speak. I was just going to listen and take in everything, but I felt it was necessary to speak to my experience. I'm resident of the Bronx. I have raised my family here in the Bronx, and I'm speaking to the experience of running for office as not the party's choice. Because I was never, I'm part of the Democratic Party. I was never my party's initial choice to run for anything. In fact, some people would say I probably ran against the party. So I would assume that most people would think that I'm speaking on behalf of open primaries. I'm really not. I'm actually speaking to my experience, which is that I've always, it's very, most of the time, I actually made it on the ballot when running against incumbents who were the party's selection. And when I ran for a party position as district leader, I actually beat the district leader that was supported by my party. And quite honestly, I feel like it's less about closed primaries as the problem to why people are not participating. And this is coming from somebody who's a resident of the Bronx, who ran for office, who door knocked, who spoke to community members to get them to vote for her. And most of what I heard from my community members and the community that I walked through, door knocked through, was their concern that they felt that their vote didn't count. It was less about not being recognized by a particular party and more about feeling as though their vote didn't count. Also, and which is why I was a huge proponent of ranked choice voting, because, you know, your vote counts in many different ways. So that was my experience with the folks that I interacted with on a regular basis as a candidate, and door knocking and helping other people out on their campaigns and being a campaign consultant for other people who ran for office. Also, what I will say is education is critical, because most people do not understand or know about party positions. And that's community members' opportunity to get more involved in party politics and have their voices and their concerns heard. And in so many communities, and I implore you to investigate this, a lot of those county committee seats go vacant.
Thank
and
you.
those are opportunities for people to actually participate within their party and be heard.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And I do want to thank those of you online, those of you still with us, for being here. I hope you know how important it is that your voices are heard. That's why we're here. Thank you to everyone for testimony this evening. The next public hearing of the commission will be held on Staten Island on June 23rd at 5 p.m. at Snug Harbor Cultural Center, at 1000 Richmond Terrace, Building P lobby in Staten Island. And now the all-important question, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, certainly is.
And is there a second? And do we have a vote in favor? Yes, thank you all very much.